You're good.
What is up, everyone? Thank you for joining in. This is the Shifting Lane Garage podcast. Weird to continue to say that. We're now podcasting this. We're also live streaming this. So if you're listening to this later, you can always join us on Facebook or our second YouTube channel, Shifting Lanes Garage. Today, we have a very esteemed and wonderful guest who also loves Volvos. So now I'm not outnumbered anymore, which is great. So, Elliot Alvis, thank you for
Hey,
joining us. And I
happy
appreciate
to
you
be here.
coming on and chatting cars with us.
Super excited to be here. I mean, I've watched a few of these, so it's glad to be third panel here with you guys.
Yes, we appreciate you coming on, and I know you've jumped into a couple of these streams in the past. Seen you in chat in a couple of them, so
Yeah,
appreciate it. And hopefully, some of your fans, I know you have a pretty burgeoning following as well. So hopefully, some of your fans swing in so they can be able to not only chat with us but also chat with you too. That's the whole point of this. So that would
exactly.
be very, very cool. But for those that don't know who you are, please give us your 60 second to 12 minute, giving you a wide berth elevator speech of who you are, what you do, and why did you get into what you do here on the old interwebs.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, yeah, there's a lot to it. Obviously, like anything else, anybody who gets into this scene, it's not exactly like a simple story, I guess. My name is Elliot. I grew up a car guy because of my dad, stuff like that. I was always around cars. I was always doing stuff with them, albeit mostly older stuff. But my transition to what I do now, and as far as the summary of that is, I'm an automotive YouTuber, not unlike yourselves and some of the other greats that I'm no doubtly everybody else follows. Your Tyler Hoovers, your Doug DeMuros, and etc. Um, that's what I do now. It's not my main job yet, but it's getting there. And I do kind of a mixture of several things. So I have my own fleet of cars, including Gregson knows notably a Volvo. But I am also fortunate enough to do kind of some new car reviews and what I would call like car experiences. Like I get to kind of travel around, do certain events, and I even do commentary for an auction company. I'd kind of do like live on air colored commentary just about cars, which is basically like calling a football game except for cars. So it's very, very up my alley. As far as how I got into it, like I said, I grew up a car guy. I mean, probably not unlike everybody listening right now. But I also grew up a film guy. My mom was
Oh,
on in the TV business for forever, and my dad was kind of a lighting and set designer as part of a thing in college. And it
oh, that's
took
cool.
forever until I put it together that I was like, I like cars. I know how to do video stuff. And then I started to see people like Tyler and people like local to me. They were like, oh my God, this is actually something that's a really cool way to share your passion. And, or if you have these two skills, like I didn't even need to learn one and then the other. It was like, no, I know them both. I just needed to put them together.
Let's
And it just was
marry
like,
those two together and have a beautiful symbiotic relationship in YouTube.
exactly. And so that's all it was, is it took several people around me kind of doing it. And then I was like, wait a second. I have those things. It was like one of those smack me in the face. Why am I not doing this kind of moments? And I just started. Of course, we can probably all relate to this. If you're not in the YouTube game, it is far from an overnight thing. I mean, you can make cool stuff, you can make great stuff, but the way the YouTube works is if
Oh
nobody's
yeah,
watching, no, it won't recommend it. And because when you start out, you have zero people watching, it just won't recommend it. So you're just in this
yeah,
constant like thing. And I don't know. Eventually, though, long story short, still elevator pitch here. Eventually, it snowballed a little bit, with some help from friends and everything else. And it's just been an awesome ride. And now I get to share my automotive passion with other people in a really cool way. And like I said, it's just still surreal that I get to do even things like this, every day. It's awesome.
yeah. That's very cool, and that's sort of like what I wanted to talk to you about is because for those of you that are watching and or listening, please go follow Elliot's YouTube channels and social medias. If you're watching, they're down at the bottom of the screen. If you're listening, it is just search Elliot Alvis on literally any platform, and he's the first guy that comes up.
It's
I've,
like the
I've
last name is Elvis with an A. It's kind of a weird
yeah,
last name. I get it, but just think about it like that. Every restaurant reservation we've ever had is like Elvis Party of Four, and you're like, ah. But I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure even if you type in Elliot Alvis, it might accidentally still lead to me.
That's good because yeah, it's like what websites do is they always take like the misspelling of their own company name and just utilize that as .com and .net too, and they just
Yeah.
redirect it. So
Well,
it's the same deal with you. So, but
exactly.
that's sort of what I wanted to ask you about, and I know you got into YouTube, and I know you do the commentary on the side. So that was actually what I was most interested in because I've hopped into some of your streams and watched you do some of that commentary.
Yeah.
How did you get into that exactly? Because it's
It
obviously you're going around, you're talking to like-minded car people, but it seems to skew a lot to sort of the older car crowd and not necessarily a lot of the newer stuff like hypercars and supercars of like the 20, the 2000s, the 2010s and whatever. It's a lot of sort of like the older stuff. Where
right.
did you even get into something like that, or how did
It
you make that contact?
it's a great story, actually. It literally was one of those things, and it again for people who don't do YouTube, pretty much anything older than 1980 is like literally tied a boat anchor to yourself and jumping in the ocean. It's that people don't watch older car stuff. I'm sure, yes, there's a few people that look up specifically that, but just in general, it's that you got to look at YouTube as it is, and people just look up stuff. I mean, literally, that's kind of why Doug DeMuro made Cars and Bids 1980s and up, because there's
Right.
just like younger people, the YouTube generation. It's cars might as well not existed before then.
Oh,
And
true.
there's a lot of it. I mean, we all grew up in that, like all the stuff that we care about is in the 90s and stuff like that. But the way I grew up was with older stuff with my dad. My dad loves vintage cars, and he kind of bestowed a lot of that knowledge on me, just being around it, the significance of it. And then even through experiences that I had with him, I got to do the Great Race a few times, which is a pre-war vintage cross-country rally. So I
Really?
got to be around a lot of this stuff, So I basically grew up with all old car knowledge, but then learning about the new stuff on my own. But all the knowledge bestowed on me was from my dad and being around all this stuff. And it just was one of those things. I never intended it because I never really went out and made a bunch of old car videos because even from Tyler and all those guys, where they were like, this will never work. Like, even if it's awesome and you love it, people don't watch. And so the way I got kind of hooked up with Worldwide, believe it or not, was, like I said, purely by accident. I was kind of making what I would call one of my adventure videos. It was kind of like, man, we're just in screwing around. We were out at Car Week, and they have a little bit of everything at Monterey Car Week. And one of the things that I did was, well, long story short, we kind of had to sneak into the R&M auction. Um, but we did. We successfully did. And then once we were there, nobody started questioning it. And I had kind of made a video pointing out some of the significant cars. Obviously, they were all over the map. They had Enzos and they had the new stuff. But I was pointing out some of the older stuff that I was very impressed with. And somehow, somebody involved with Worldwide saw that video. One, thought it was funny, which is crazy because they're in the auction business too. I figured they'd be like, we want this guy nowhere near any of our stuff. But he basically, one of the people said, wow, you are not 65 years old and you know things about pre-war cars. That is pretty rare. And they were like, how
Yeah.
would you like to come and do something like that for us? And when I saw that email, I literally was like, this seems like a scam, because there was like no letterhead. It was like an email I'd never seen before. It was like just text. And I'm like, what even is this?
That
You
sounds
know?
very on brand for a pre-war car
Yeah.
live stream, though, to be
Right.
honest.
And
So
so I was like,
it's
what is this? I
legit.
was like, what's your angle here? They were like, just come out and like literally just do that, but you'll be allowed to. And I was like, oh, okay. I still don't get what the angle is here.
All right.
Uh, but as time marched on, I was like, okay, that'll be fun. Like, I don't really know what you guys are getting out of this, but I'll definitely do it. And I don't know the full backstory, but their old on-air personality either couldn't make it or got sick or something like that. And they were like, hey, you're going to be here anyway. How do you feel about doing live commentary? And I literally I answered honestly. They was like, I've never done it before, but I'm pretty sure I could do it. And they were like, great, you're the guy. And so I went from being like,
Nice. Nothing like baptism by fire.
it was. And I was seriously, I've never been more scared of anything. And they're like, like, here's the stuff. Here's what you need to say. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never done anything like this. But I guess to make a medium story short, I did a good enough job that they were like, do you want to do this again? and I got kind of roped into the crew. I mean, it's provided me with these great opportunities, not only just doing the commentary and being around the cars, which
Right.
obviously is more than enough, but they'll let me drive the cars before auction and do videos, or drive them up on stage and do this. It's evolved into this crazy thing that, like, even the people that work for Bear Jackson, stuff like that, they don't get to do that. And for
Right.
some reason, I have fallen into being able to do those things. And one, it's a testament to how crazy of a situation it is. And two, it's a testament to their cars, because if you guys have ever been to a car auction, that's kind of the reason a lot of people bring their cars to auction is you go, hey, it shines up real nice, don't start it. You know, like, it's one of those,
Right.
there's a lot of that.
They're
And,
rolling it on by hand for a reason.
exactly. At a Mecum or whatever else, there's
Yeah.
tons of people who it can run enough to get across the block, but after that, it's your problem, and you don't know what you're getting until after you
Yeah.
buy it. But that's the risk. It's, hey,
Sure.
it either is or isn't, and you play to that. So far, everything that I've experienced at Worldwide, they were like, not only is this car fine, we'll trust you to go out and drive it and bring it back. Or if somebody wants to drive it beforehand, like, I'm like, man, no auction company wants you to go near their cars before a block. And I'm like, so anyway, it's a great group of people. I got into it because I snuck into a different auction company's auction. They saw the video, and then I stumbled into the live stream thing, and they keep liking what I'm doing, and I couldn't be more happy with it. It's my favorite thing that I do 3 times a year.
That's very cool. And yeah, I've watched those. We gotta watch more of those. And I would love to like have more people from there watching like our stuff with you in it, and like doing more things along that route is just
Yeah,
very cool, because not a lot of people do it. So it's just a very interesting side of cardom that not a lot of the modern crowd gets
right.
or gets to consume a lot, because again, like you said, it's pre-war, it's old stuff, but
Yeah,
that's how cars evolved, and it's just
it's
very
difficult to
interesting
relate
to
to.
watch.
I do
Yeah,
understand it. Kids these
yeah.
days are like, yeah. I mean, think about it. Like, a younger car enthusiast right now thinks like an R33 GTR is a classic car.
Right.
And you're like, believe
Which
it or
is
not,
nuts.
but I mean, so I get it. It's something that's so old that not their dad didn't have one, their grandpa didn't have one. So it's like, well, what even is this, and why do I care about it? And
Right.
it's kind of, I guess, a one-man quest of being like, no, these are actually really cool. Some of these are really, really cool and special. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's still a different kind of path of car enthusiasm that is not necessarily untapped, but I think it's unfortunately withering away. But
It is. It
yeah,
is. It's true. And on that note, speaking of withering away, by the way, Chad's here too, who hasn't said a word. So
hi, Chad.
sorry, didn't mean to like just literally take over the conversation. But hi, Chad.
What's going on? No, it's
You like
interesting.
that segue of withering away and then hi, Chad.
It's interesting with like the older car stuff, just because I think people, Greg, like my age and Greg, we're that last sort of generation that, like you said, doesn't consider a R33 a classic kind of a thing.
Yeah. By the way, 39. So on the cusp. Was born in 84. So I'm
Yeah,
on that cusp of like, oh, I grew up with these cars.
sure.
We played Gran Turismo with these cars. They're not necessarily classics. I still consider personally anything from like 70s era muscle cars into the early 80s, maybe mid 80s. That's where my classic timeline sort of cuts off.
Yeah,
Anything after that is not a classic. It's just a modern car to me.
I agree. I grew up the same kind of stuff.
My
Yeah.
mindset is the second they neutered cars because of the emissions laws, that's like the cutoff for classic, right? Like that 72-ish era until car, because think of what was Chevy would cram a big block into something and it would make like 190 horsepower
Oh, yeah, under 200 horsepower. You're
Yeah.
with like
"How?"
500
I
cubic
didn't know.
inches.
Yeah.
What was the famous one? It's like the Firebird or something that had like a 5-liter V8 that made 200 horsepower or something. It was like, man, that is
There's
just
worse offenders
efficiency
than
at its
that.
finest.
There's like over 6-liter Cadillacs that make less than 200 horsepower, and you're like I said, you just even look at it, you're like, I don't even understand how you choke it down that much.
Right.
But they did.
Yeah, that's crazy to have that large of a literage and 0 power, basically.
At that
No, we
point,
went
it's just
through,
the
like,
power
a
of the
dark period in
pistons
cars.
falling down.
Yeah.
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 We literally did go through a huge dark period in cars. People don't realize it. Luckily, though, we were all of the age when we lived through them right at the peak of them coming back. Like our parents had to deal with the dark age of cars. Unfortunately for them, they also got through the golden age of them generally. But they had to. I mean, I can't imagine how frustrated it'd be for my dad, somebody like my dad's age or maybe a little younger, to be like, "Oh man, muscle cars are awesome." As I'm in high school, and then you like finally get to go buy them, and you're like, "Well, your options are a '78 Corvette that makes 0 horsepower," and you're like, "Oh, and this is the coolest thing that's available." You're like, "Yep, pretty much."
Yeah. I'm gonna scare off all the people that are not a fan of modern cars now. Modern fuel injection, direct injection, and 0 viewers.
Yeah. I'm sure there are a lot of carburetor enthusiasts are they're really hip on live chat.
Yeah, exactly.
What is it?
They know the lingo. They're down with the lingo.
Yeah.
They're on Fleek. Is that one still around on Fleek, or did that die in like 2019? I'm not sure.
Oof. I don't know. We might
I
all
don't
be
remember.
too old to be.
What's my shortcut for muting Greg? Shift X.
I don't know what it means. I just know that it's a word that people used at some point. I'm like, cool.
Yeah, well, like anything else internet related, it was here, it was gone, and we were too old to notice.
Pretty much.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's actually a couple channels that one mostly, but like Skid Factory or what have you, they've done a bunch of like pre-1980 stuff and been moderately successful with it or what have you. But I think their success is more in the guys doing the work than the car itself. Like, if that makes sense. You know,
yeah.
Turbo Yoda and whatever. I'm going to waste way too much time trying to remember the other guy's name. But like, they've done some pretty interesting. They did a Hakusuka GTR that they put a big Nissan V8 in, which was actually pretty cool or what have you. But it's just interesting because so much of the car YouTube space kind of ends up, and I don't want to like lump everyone in together and sort of offend content creator, but it all sort of falls into the same sort of stuff, right? Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, that's the thing, is you fall into what the algorithm loves, and it's as creators you become a slave to the algorithm and not exactly what you want, which is why a lot of these channels that start out doing kind of normal everyday cars because that's what they can afford always delve into, now I have a twin turbo Lamborghini. You're like, because first of all, they can afford it now, and second of all, it's because guess what 12 and 13-year-old kids are Googling?
Yeah.
Twin turbo Lamborghini, not
what was it?
Volvo station wagon, unfortunately.
What was it short? Like, I know Daily Driven Exotics and stuff has always been on that. Like, they literally started their channel with a Lamborghini Gallardo. But it just was fascinating to me is when Freddie did his twin turbo Lambo, now all of a sudden, like, his buddies, like, B is for Build shows up with a Lamborghini and this, and Lambo's like everywhere. And I remember when we went down there when we were picking up the Aston for Greg. He's like, "Hey, here's why I have to sell the Aston Martin." And we're sitting there, and my abiding memory of that car is like, okay, the wheels are extremely red, but all the switchgear was straight off a Jetta. I was like, wow. I could not imagine spending what this thing was new, looking down and being like, hey, that's the same button that's in my $36,000 Jetta that my wife is commuting in.
Yep. No, that's a problem across the industry. But yeah, it's wild. But I think you had a good point, though. Freddie did kind of pioneer the, even though a few of them did, I guess Stradman early on. But like they said, it was like the Gallardo, at least. I don't think it is anymore. But it was like, hey, this is the key to YouTube, straight to the top.
Yeah.
And that series was fascinating. I mean, and it's incredible and everything else. And obviously he's moved on to even bigger and better things, but that's just the way it is, unfortunately, because there's a lot of commenters that are like, why don't you get back to the normal stuff? Like, we want to see some 90s Nissans. We want to see some just kind of regular Honda builds and stuff like that. Yeah. But then you watch some channels do it, and unfortunately it's just like, unless you're doing something out of this world with one of those, it's the views aren't there. Like, it has to be the way, like I said, you're just feeding this machine that is ever changing.
You have to do like what Whistling Diesel did. Like, he just took a hopped up truck, which is like nothing. There's a bajillion of those here in the United States, and he put like such big tires on it that he could swim in the Atlantic. Like, okay, well now I'm gonna go watch that. because
Exactly.
that's
It's so
just
cool.
ridiculous. Like, who wouldn't want to watch that?
With-
But that's like doing crazy stuff. Like, I mean, he's
That's
skewed
his
more
channel.
modern now.
That's
like,
his channel, though, is to do
well,
the,
yeah. I
the
mean, that's
crazy
just him.
dumbest.
But like,
I mean, his whole Ferrari
right.
thing
But
with the Ferrari.
to Elliot's point, like, you'd have to take like, all right, well, I'm gonna take this 1970s. Or I'm going to take a 69 Camaro SS that's in mint condition and swap in a K motor and make 1,000 horsepower with a turbo. And people will
See,
be
that
like,
might actually
one,
people will be like, wow, that's
sacrilege.
crazy.
Yeah. One, sacrilege. Two, I want to see what this thing does. Like,
Exactly.
So
And,
that's
you
what
know.
you kind of have to skew towards if you're going to go an older car to make it just wild.
But I also think it is what made, as you guys were the pioneers of the Volvo YouTube thing, I would say, is there's also this, which I didn't discover until my own one, is there's also a large, passionate group of very specific brand people that
Yes.
are thirsty for content, and no one makes anything about it.
Yeah.
So if you can tap into that, whether it be by accident like I did, or, you know, whatever else, it's like, then you can get views that way by not doing anything crazy. Like you and I both didn't have to go, we're putting the turbo out of the top of the hood of the V70R and
Yes.
putting it on mudders. It was like, you just had to kind of do what you would think a car enthusiast would do with these cars. And you have a huge passionate group of people behind it. But again, finding that was almost, you know, a luck of the draw thing.
Right.
I mean, I don't really know what you can't even say, oh, if you get a Saab, for sure, you'll have a baked in audience. You can't say that, you know, it's just this interesting thing. You either have to do something like, Whistling Diesel, where I'm going to drive in the Atlantic, or you find, like, again, the Volvo passion group where you're like, wow, holy crap, there's a huge untapped mine of fans out here.
I'd put one more caveat in that, and it's only because, like, you have to be interesting too, because you can't just like slap a car in there that's just really cool. Like again, Gallardo's very cool. Even if you have just someone that has no personality and you slap like Ferrari SF90s and on Gallardo's and P1s and yada yada yada, and they even own this stuff, like, no one's still gonna watch. There's one channel in particular that I won't name that bought up a lot of YouTuber cars, and they thought they were going to have like a ton of like views and stuff. Like they got a lot of subscribers from it, but like they have like over 100,000 subscribers and they get like 2,000 views.
Yeah.
It's because it's kind of, it's boring.
Yeah. And well, I mean, and you know, for any kid that's watching, there's a lot of that too. I don't know if you guys have kids or around kids ever. It's the Twitch phenomenon. Everyone's like, well, I'll be a video game streamer one day. And you're kind of like, yeah, right. So the thing is, you have to be like, I'm really good at whatever X game. And you're like, right. So you can be really good at the game or whatever. But it's like the guys that are making it is because they themselves, you're watching them. You can almost care less what they're doing.
100%. I mean, look at a guy like Tim the Tatman, right? Like he was good at a specific game, but he's above average in every other game. Not the best, but he's just a highly entertaining individual. So people come back for that. That's the biggest thing. It could almost be insert X widget here if you can make it entertaining.
Right.
You know,
that's definitely the case, because you can be a really, really good car mechanic, but there's a really good chance you're not going to be very charismatic on camera, you know, or make it interesting to watch. You know, so there is a perfect balance of things for sure. But yeah, it's just it's an interesting field, I guess you could say. I mean, no matter what, the online entertainment industry, and that obviously opens the door for inappropriate things, but I guess it works for them too. You know,
well, there's a space for that now too. So
that's what I'm saying. And you know what? And some of them are better at it than others too. For
I mean, I'm gonna try to keep this as unspecific as possible.
Trying to keep it cool.
As PG as possible. But it's like, well, I've seen that. I don't really have a reason to come back.
Yeah. Exactly.
They're actually really entertaining, and I get something pleasant to look at. Let's go.
I'll close that topic with, you can be hot, but if you have no personality, people are going to get tired of it real fast. Because the best advice I was ever given as a 16-year-old that
I was going to say as an OnlyFans creator.
No, as an OnlyFans creator, as a 16-year-old that was girl crazy, was find someone you can talk to, because looks fade real fast. And I'm like, ooh, that's literally the OnlyFans generation. Literally what's happening currently. There's lots of hotness, but you know what? You have to be interesting. Again, it's the same thing with YouTube.
Exactly.
You can be hot,
It
and
is.
it's like, okay, well, you're boring, so I'm gonna go find someone else. It's the
There you
same.
go,
It's
dude. You nailed
honestly
it.
just the same thing.
You nailed it. You can be hot and boring, or you can be boring with a Gallardo. They're not gonna.
It's not. Like you have to make it work, and you have to understand the game a little bit. But you also have to have a personality. Like it's the same thing with like if you have a good personality, people are just drawn to you. So it's just that same kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of cars, I still think it's. I know you can't see from this sliver, but I do feel still bad. You're the only person with the car in the background.
Well, Shifting Lanes Garage, we got to have someone with a car behind them, and I've seen you guys in chatting about that, so we're going to talk about that really quick. But before we get out of our sort of intro phase here, I wanted to ask you really quick, rapid fire, two things. Favorite car YouTube channels, what are your top 3? And favorite non-car YouTube channels, what are your top 3? And they don't have to be like your favorites. It's like, what do you just gravitate to on the usual? Like what's your go-tos for your stuff if you watch them at all?
Yeah, it's be tough to see. I know you had this, and I was semi-prepared for this one, but I didn't prepare for top 3, which is way harder than you think it should be. I obviously got to shout out, Tyler Hoover is like the go-to because he's the guy who got me into. He's got me a lot of opportunities and everything else.
Sure.
And still finds a way to make everything interesting. And he's a good presenter. It's just good. No matter what he's doing, even as a, I guess, somewhat biased person, still love the channel. And I was a fan before I was a friend, so I can say that genuinely. Doug DeMuro, I still love. I still put him up there just because it is still good. It's very formulaic, I guess, like everything else now. But it's a great space. It's literally all I care about is kind of the weird stuff on cars anyway, because the normal reviews are, all modern cars are so kind of good anymore that it's really tough to give an original driving review because you're like, hey, it's been made after 2008. It's pretty good. That's the that's pretty accurate. Review of cars. If you're new to cars, that's the general rule.
It doesn't suck as bad as they all used to. The end.
Right. Yeah. So that's the general rule. So I like that he dives in on the specifics of on what makes whatever that is, whether it be a Kia or a Lamborghini. I do still like that niche portion of it. Now, I have a lot of others, obviously, that I either personally know. I'm a little partial to VinWiki, as whatever. But I've been really loving the Haggerty series versions with Jason Camisa because they're so well done. He's such an excellent presenter, and he embodies what I like to try to do or strive for in my channel. It's the kind of content you could make a non-car person watch, and they won't go, "Ugh, this is so technical and boring." He's a good writer. He's an excellent, entertaining presenter, and the freaking production value in every one of those videos is out of this world. Like whether you like it or not, watch that Cybertruck video he just did recently. I mean, that was really good. I can't imagine how expensive it was just to produce. And like I said, just the writing is so entertaining. And like I said, unfortunately, there's a million more that I could name, but those are like the top 3 that I'm like, man, you can't skip one of those.
Yeah,
that's the Top Gear effect. Is making 100%. Someone who doesn't care about a car care about the car you're driving.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and like I said, I strive for that in my own channel to a small degree because, like, if I'm working on something, I absolutely will not show you in real time me turning the wrench because that is super boring. I'll say what I'm gonna do. And I'll even skip to when I've already done it, but it's like there's certain channels that will, and that's their whole game. It's here's every ratchet click, but that's I don't.
Yeah, and that's fine. But there is a much wider audience that wants to be part of the journey as opposed to turning the wrench with you. So
absolutely,
there's a space for it, but it's not necessarily the space that I'd like to occupy. So I'm totally with you. The whole time lapse, like 30 seconds, 20 seconds of what you did. Cool, great, done.
Shows that work was being done, but not necessarily, whatever happens is, you're not going skipping it into somebody you brought in a bunch of ringers. It was just, I did it. It's just, trust me, it was boring. I also couldn't see, so I wasn't going to shove a camera down into some crevice so that you could kind of also not see.
I will shout out our one buddies that we've known for such a long time. If you're interested in like just good car content, and for those watching and listening as well, our buddies over at Albon, Albon, they're just great storytellers. Guff is the main person that just does all the voiceover and the actual stuff, but they do really good stories. They did a great one on like Carlos Ghosn of why he was uh like a criminal now, of like, and everything like that. There was a great one on Smokey and the Secret Garage stuff with Toyota. Like, it was just a really good channel for entertainment value with good B-roll, good storytelling. So definitely check them out too. Just that just popped into my head because you said, because Jason is such a good storyteller, and so it's great entertainment. Theirs is the same way. It's like digestible content, but they do one every month or two. It's just really good, and it's really fun to watch, and it's just interesting too as car people, just like, oh, this is a good one to watch too. So that's one of my kind of go-tos whenever they release one. Is my top three. I always watch them, again, not just because they're friends, because it's just really entertaining.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you on that.
Yeah.
I love that. I have a million of those where I'm like, man, these guys are so small, but they're so good.
Yeah.
Or not even so small sometimes. It's like, man, that's just really good stuff.
Yeah.
But to switch gears, I guess, to save my non-car three favorite, again, very tough to pick, because believe it or not, I am kind of like half and half on my subscriptions list of car stuff and non-car stuff.
Same.
I even kind of had to just take a quick look, because I'm like, you'll scroll through and you're like, oh yeah, there's this and there's this. I really love, a lot of the science channels. There's a huge crop of them. So it's kind of a cheap answer, but there's like a few of them that are, not necessarily Mark Rober, obviously great, but there's like the Backyard Scientist, and a few Peter Schreepel. All these guys are kind of like in a science group that kind of do really good and interesting stuff together. Like Peter Schreepel makes model airplane, like flyable airplanes out of non-conventional things all the time. And like, the first video that got me hooked was he made a flyable, controllable model RC airplane out of a Ryobi leaf blower. And I'm like, that's crazy. And then, he made one out of a power drill. Like, I was like, okay, this is just fascinating. Cool
that's very cool. I'll have to check that out. That sounds awesome and right up my alley.
Cool. Yeah. And then, everybody else kind of messing with different things. Obviously, you got it's too basic, like, your hydraulic press channels that are always just kind of fun to be like, that's kind of neat, but not really good storytelling content. I've been recently very into it's a misleading channel name, but it's called Fascinating Horror, and it sounds like it's me like horror stories. It's really not. It's just it's very good storytelling with a lot of good B-roll, because a lot of the stuff happened at it, but it's basically kind of historical retelling of like kind of crazy disasters, that some of which you've never even heard of, a lot of which I hadn't, and then obviously really good versions of ones you have heard of. But I mean, it's absolutely the horror part is kind of misleading, but the fascinating part is 100% there. I mean, it's crazy. They're short. They're like 7 minutes long. So you watch it and you're not like, because I mean, sometimes you're like, man, I'm in for this 30-minute commitment. I don't have time for this right now. But every time you're like, I've got 7 minutes for whatever this is, even if it's not that good. But every time it's good, and you find out and you're like, you just get sucked in. And there's all these crazy things that happened in the late 1890s to 1930s that I just had no idea happened, because obviously they were like local disasters or weird things. And you're like, it's just mind blowing. I mean, like I said, some of the stuff is just hard to believe unless you saw the footage and the way that this guy tells the story. It's fantastic. There's a couple of gaming channels I like. I really like to watch. Of course, it like gravitates still kind of towards cars. Like I don't play it myself. I have, but like there's like, if you've heard of BeamNG Drive, there's a lot of good content creators that make really interesting, fun stuff to do in what is like a sandbox world of real life car crunch destruction. It's actually very fascinating. I'm honestly more fascinated in what they think up to do in those. Than anything else.
I get sucked in by like all the reels I see on the BeamNG stuff. It's just wild what these guys come up with.
Trust me, if you followed any one of like this, there's like 3 or 4 or 5 channels of them. Like even those 25-minute videos, you're like, there's no way I'll watch this guy play this for 25 minutes. And you're like, well, and then you do.
And then you do. You're like, wow, it's like 3 hours later. What happened?
Right. And then the last one that I could probably name is just this. It's this little, well, it's not even a little channel anymore, but it's this channel called Company Man. And he literally talks about these, like, that's what's crazy is it's such a good niche. Like we were talking about earlier. He literally will talk about either a big brand or company and either talk about why they're successful or why they went away. And sometimes you're like, well, it's obvious, I know this, and you find out and you're like, wow, like he has a really good way of storytelling as well. About, like I said, and it's not just like always Kmart. Sometimes it's a specific product within this thing, and there's all this cool history, and like, the next thing you know, you're like, wow, I never knew there was so much behind Nabisco. Like I never thought about it, really, you know. And that's, I guess, one of the other channels that I watch. I'm like, oh yeah, I actually want to know why 7-Up isn't doing well anymore. I never really thought about it, you know.
So
and
what we're
like,
saying here is we're all kind of history buffs a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
If you're into history and really good storytelling, check out the Fat Electrician. His stuff centered a lot around
Great one.
military and sort of that war space. Like he got his start doing different, you know, like the Apache, different types of guns in the military and stuff. But he's kind of gravitated into like anti-heroes or just interesting, weird historical events that we might know something about, but not the full story. The one he just released today was about the Great Eggnog Riot at West Point back in the late 1890s.
That sounds awesome. I'm already in.
And
it does sound awesome, and also
it's
horrible,
about
and
a
I want
bunch
to
of,
watch it now.
You picture a West Point cadet, but it's about a bunch of West Point cadets getting just hammered and almost going to battle with their instructors. It's a great story.
That
awesome. Sounds like a great West Point story.
Yeah,
I love that.
He does, and kind of to bring it back, he did a lot of TikTok short form. We were talking about this before we went live, but he did a lot of short form stuff, and then his buddies are like, dude, make these into like a 9, 10, 12-minute video, and you'll slay. And he's like, I don't know. And then he'd launch, and then he, like, as content, you can understand this. His first video, I think, got like 500,000 views in, I think it was a week and a half or 2 weeks
nuts.
or something like that. Like his first long form video, and like every other content creator at the table during this podcast, you could see they just wanted to leap across the table and punch him in the forehead.
Yeah, like a murder.
It was funny, but again, and it's not the way he presents it is kind of like One of Us, is being that, you know, guy who might be in his mid 30s, 40s, or what have you, but really hasn't really progressed past the mental maturity age of like 16. So he presents it in a very funny.
That is us.
He presents it in a. I mean, we literally just scaled up our Hot Wheels. That's all we're doing.
Pretty much
accurate.
So, but he has a really good way of weaving in actual facts and doing it in a very way that's extremely relatable as sort of an immature guy. But I mean, everybody, like, you don't get his success without relating to everyone. But some of the stuff, he managed to make a video on the backstory of government cheese interesting.
Oh,
and
yes.
which led to now there are billions of pounds of cheese in underground warehouses in the middle of Missouri.
Yeah, it's like they're like in essentially a cave. I thought it was a term forever too, but
it was legit, and that in and of its and that thanks to I think it was Reagan was the first one to be like, yo, we're spending $1 million a day on refrigeration for cheese. $1 million a day of taxpayers' money for cheese. It's like, all right, I'm going to take all this cheese and I'm going to yeet it into the ocean. Well, people got pissed, not because it was bad for the environment, but it's like, hey, I've been paying for all this cheese. I want my damn cheese.
Give it to me.
And then
give it to me.
5-pound blocks, and then steady diet of government cheese in a van down by the river. And that's where it was. And that led to the Got Milk campaign when we were growing up. He took that story about government cheese and turned it into this fascinating thing. Some people have a real talent for that stuff, and he obviously does. And the funniest thing is when he goes on the Unsub podcast, he talks about how he's actually in college now to get a degree as in some form of history. I don't know the specifics. But like the kids are sitting here and they're like, and he's like, I'll just take the opposing viewpoint just for fun because the class is all about conversation, and just slaughter these kids from a viewpoint because they haven't. I don't even know if they're being exposed to as much of the history as we were or what have you. It's a really good one. I definitely it's on my would recommend checking out.
Chad, you reminded me though of that like as a kid. even like without even thinking about it, you remind me of like two commercials that always baffled me. One was like got milk, because I'm like, it wasn't like a particular brand. It was like, why are they just generally advertising milk?
Yeah.
Like I never got it. And then the other one that was like a little later than that, and I don't know if anybody in the chat remembers this one, but for some reason when I was younger, there were all these commercials about verb, it's what you do. And I was like, why are they advertising verbs? I was like, what is somebody getting out of that?
Right.
It was always like, hey, go do something.
I remember actually the verb
And I was
ones,
like-
and the whole thing about the verb is to get kids more active because of the obesity that was actually being brought on by all these
Well, because
processed
everybody
foods from the
started
80s and 90s, and they wanted to get kids active. So it was the whole thing that like the run, jump, play thing with like the NFL. It was the
Yeah.
same. It was that in
But at
that
least that was
same vein.
clear of what was happening. This one was like, hey, verb, it's what you do. And you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And then like I was like, what's happening here? You know, like,
Verb,
who's
it's what
making
you
money
do.
off of verbs?
Well, I'm pooping, so that's technically
Yeah.
a verb, but I'm not really doing anything. So it's a weird scenario right now. Like,
Yeah, I
it's
need to
just
get in on
strange.
who's making money off of verbs. I need to get in on that. Like, you know, it's like,
Exactly.
can I be the pronoun guy? Can I start collecting?
English teachers are making money on verbs. That's about it.
Oh man.
There's a profession.
I'm trying to look up the got milk one now because I know that there was a reason behind it, and I think it was like,
Well, there were posters when we were kids too.
Well,
There'd be like
yeah.
Michael Jordan with the milk mustache.
Yeah, or
You know, or whatever it was.
Mark McGuire, milk mustache. Really, it was a needle
Yeah,
in the arm.
whatever
but
it was, milk mustache.
but it was
celebrity.
because-
if you got a
That's
milk
right.
So
poster-
the short version of the story, Greg, is prohibition, and when all these bars as social establishments, right? We can't serve alcohol anymore. So what they ended up becoming was ice cream parlors.
I love that the Got Milk campaign has roots in prohibition. By the way,
I know.
there are prohibition roots for Got Milk. That is honestly hysterical to me.
especially because alcohol and milk, that's curdling.
Yeah, they're polar opposites. But
Yeah, unless you're making a White Russian, I don't want to hear it.
so all these bars become ice cream parlors, and now there's a reason to actually be a dairy farmer. Prior to this, because of refrigeration and all this, it was unprofitable to be strictly a dairy farmer. You'd make milk, sell it to the local market, but you did something else on the as far as your primary income as a farmer. Now people can be actual dairy farmers. So they're making all of this ice cream. So much so that during World War II, and this is one of the biggest logistical flexes in American history, is we literally had a $1 million barge parked off the side of, I forget what theater it was in, but it was sole purpose of this barge in a war zone was to make ice cream for the soldiers. Like, that's how addicted these soldiers were to ice cream. So now you have all these dairy farmers, they're going nuts, business is booming, blah, blah, blah. Well, the war ends, prohibition ends. Now all of a sudden, they're making all this stuff, but there's nowhere near the demand to it. So now the government's like, well, shoot, what do? We just told all these guys to be dairy farmers. Now they're like, all of them are going to go out of business. Shoot. So the government starts buying the excess milk. So if Gregson's Dairy produces 100 units of milk every month, but only sells 60, the government picks up the slack.
Good amount. I like
So
what
they're-
my dairy's doing.
So they were like, well, what do we do with it? So they turned it into cheese. Right? But they never
Oh,
stopped.
now we got the government cheese coming out.
So that's where the
I was just
cheese
gonna say,
came
it all
from.
comes back to that damn government
But
cheese.
so then
yeah, that's where we're going.
So then Reagan comes along and again is like, why the hell are we spending all of this money to refrigerate all of this goddamn cheese? What the hell? And why are we still buying all this milk? So I forget the name. They set up this nonprofit for milk or for dairy products in general. And the sole purpose was to sell. And dairy farmers paid into it, and these people would advertise for milk on the dairy farmers' behalf. And that's where Got Milk came from. There was this hysterical letter that I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's like this super serious reply to or follow up on a business meeting. Like you type out an email after a business meeting, super serious, and like it's signed by the king of dairy and the queen of dairy, and it's to Pizza Hut or something like that. You know, and that's where like extra cheese comes in or double the cheese, like
Can't be
all
serious
of this
about
stuff. So the next time like someone from Europe or something was like, why in the hell do you put cheese on everything in America? It was because we weren't allowed to drink.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, I just found an article on it, and here's like the too long didn't read version. The USDA and the dairy industry were ringing the alarm bells. Milk consumption was declining, putting $1 billion industry at risk. So a clutch of new marketing groups created by the government and funded by a flood of cash took a new tact: advertising. And basically that was it. So it was a government funded advertising campaign to save the dairy industry.
How
Interesting.
about that, everybody? A car podcast, and we've just learned so much about the Got Milk campaign, prohibition, and government cheese.
That's what you get
Who'da
here.
thunk?
You get the good with the better.
We are well-rounded. We're not just here to entertain you with our car shenanigans, but also
That's
educate
right.
you. There's actually a test at
That's
the end of
right.
the year, and whoever gets the most right gets a all-expense-paid vacation with Greg.
Yeah,
Yes. I would love
by
to
and with Greg.
Yes, I'm very interested in taking vacation, so I'm all for this.
Oh,
Definitely
well, I
down.
mean,
But let's go to chat, because you guys are the whole
Yeah.
reason we kind of do this. And there's a lot of people here that I haven't seen before. So thank you for coming over from Elliot's channels. Glad you guys are here. Glad you guys can chat with him. So welcome to our normal crew. Steve, Doug, Christian, Anthony. If I'm missing any of you, please forgive me. Chat is going very quickly. But thanks for joining in, and thanks to everyone here. So I can't really see everyone in chat, but to answer a couple of questions, Chad and I are from the northern New Jersey area. So we are East Coast. We're about maybe, I don't know, 45 to an hour outside of New York City. So that gives you any idea. And I see Fred there over on YouTube. Thanks for joining, Fred. His cousins grew up in East Brunswick and live in Jackson now. So yeah, East Brunswick is about an hour from us. So you're in good company, my friend. And
Yeah.
then Lesser Logic V70 creators. Yes, we've got two V70 creators on right now, sitting
Yes.
right next to each other via Skype. So
But Gregson
that
is the still the pioneer of it.
well, it's funny because I get that from like people like, yeah, I know you from the V70R. I was like, but there's another guy that actually did it before me for Volvo specifically. His name is David Bello, or I think I've seen a couple of his
I think
things.
I've seen a few of his videos.
Yeah, he did a really beautiful restoration on a 122 Amazon or a 124. I want to say it was a coupe, but really nice restoration on his channel of an older sedan or coupe Amazon that was featured on IPD, and it was like just a really nice build. Had the original engine, just a really nice restoration project. So I would say he's probably the OG, and then. But only because I only know of him just through the Volvo community of doing the V70R, because the whole story, for those that are watching that don't know the story, is we kind of got into the whole YouTube thing as sort of a side project on Shifting Lanes, because what we did was Drive Tribe had kind of gotten to us and was like, hey, we know you're doing really well on Facebook. And we were talking about this before the stream started. Is like, we have a pretty large Facebook following on Shifting Lanes. And Drive Tribe was like, hey, we're starting this platform. Do you want to be part of this and create content for us? So stop writing on your website, come write for us on Drive Tribe. And we're like, cool. So they were flush with venture capital cash, and they were
it's the new hotness.
correct. Yeah. So they were like, hey, we're gonna throw, XYZ amount of dollars at you, which at the time was like a couple $1,000. And we're like, wow, this is amazing. This is like triple what we were doing on our website, plus the $0 we were making on YouTube. So we're like, yeah, let's go for it. So we did that, and we were like, okay, well, we all bought new iMacs to do editing stuff, and we're like, all right, let's focus more on YouTube now. So we got the writing stuff down. Let's focus more on YouTube. And I had always been into Volvos because they're interesting, and not a lot of people, like, no one suspects the Volvo, which is the common phrase. But also because they're just cool cars coming from like the 80s and 90s, and I got into them through like British touring car racing, because they took the 855 wagon and went racing in British touring cars, which was just
that story.
the silliest thing ever. But they did it, and they were competitive. They never won anything, but they came in like third and fourth a couple of times, and I'm like, this is pretty awesome. They took this wagon and just went racing with it. Like, who does that? Nobody, which was really cool.
Right.
So I've always loved them, and I'm like, I found a V70R, a P2 generation V70R from 2004, out in the middle of Pennsylvania. They had no idea what they had. It was like $3,900, and it was an automatic. It was an '04. It wasn't like the best version of it, but easily could have fetched like 6 or 7 grand for the shape it was in. And I'm like, oh, well, this thing's cool. Let's just get it. And then all of a sudden, I made like 2 videos on it and got like 10,000 subscribers. I was like, oh, holy shit, this is great. Let's go for this. So
Yeah.
that's sort of how we got into the VR stuff. And it like led to more Volvo things and then more and more and more. And then here we are. So it's very cool to kind of like this roundabout way how we kind of got into all of this.
Yeah, I'm seeing the chat a little bit myself here, Gregson. One of them is one of my friends, Davin. He's asked us twice now, which is why I do want to cover it. He said,
"Oh yeah, Davin, what's up? Thank you."
Yeah, what do we think of the Nissan Stagia? And
Oh.
I mean, first of all, I mean, you can go ahead. I was going to say, I don't know if he has one or is thinking of one. He is our resident 80s, 90s JDM guy. He's got a Pulsar with the Sportback, and I've personally gotten to ride in it. So I mean, that's so
nice.
He's an enthusiast here.
Hell yeah.
I love the Stagia, obviously, and I know that it's the cliche to call it the R34 wagon, just because what it looks like. But I mean,
I was literally going to say that.
That's what makes it look cool. Obviously, it's got a lot of its own, interesting things to it. But I mean, we're both wagon guys, and performance wagons. I mean, that's kind of right in our wheelhouse of being the JDM performance wagon of its time. If not, it is the V70R of Nissan.
True. My second comment was going to be nice Volvo because it gets mistaken for Volvos almost all the time. Yeah. On every wagon group I'm in on Facebook, someone posts a Stagia with like a front end swap. Everyone, like at least half the comments are like, "That's a beautiful Volvo you've got there." So, and it just angers everyone that owns them because the taillights are very similar to that same like P80, P2 generation.
They look great.
No, they do. They're awesome looking cars. And if they weren't right-hand drive, I would import one. I'm just not a right-hand drive fan, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough, but I don't know. I think it depends. It loses. I think if you daily drive one, I think it could lose its luster maybe, but yeah, they're kind of fun on occasion. It's just, at least around here, it's your solid light on left turn when you're just on the passenger side and you can't see. You're like, ah.
Yeah. But, not the greatest thing. Doug DeMuro's videos cured me of the right-hand drive bug, honestly, when he had the R32.
Yeah, no, I think it's fun. It's a fun experience. And then, honestly, you know what's funny? Speaking of wagons and Volvos and stuff like that, the first right-hand drive car I ever drove at all, because I really wanted to do it during my, I guess now ex-wife's and I honeymoon. We went to England, and I wanted, like, we had the whole thing, like, we didn't really need to drive, but I was like, I really need to bake something in here to where I can drive right-hand drive in a right-hand drive world. Right. So, but what I didn't think about is that I was going to be picking the car up from the heart of London, which is essentially, downtown Manhattan. But then all of the rules are different. And now you're on the other side of the car. And now I've got a freshly married woman pretty much freaking out because she's like, I don't like being on this side of the car. Everything's different. And I'm like, everything's different to me too. Hang on. And we're in a diesel Volvo V70 over there. Not a cross. Well, it might have been I think it was just a diesel Volvo V70, but it's not a P3. But what year was it? It had to have been 2018. It doesn't matter. But the point is, it was the new one then, but diesel, because it's England. And I just remember being like, this is wild. But it made sense because everybody else was over there too.
Sure.
It's when you get into the right-hand drive and a left-hand drive world. Yeah. I don't know. Now having done left or right-hand drive in a left-hand drive world after that, I felt it a little easier just because I already knew the rules of the road over here.
Yeah.
So all you had to do is, okay, now I'm on the other side of the car. There, you're on the other side of the car, and you're like, oh my gosh, what does that symbol mean? And, like there's all these weird things. And then like you kind of get default. You're like, well, I'm turning right. So you kind of just look left real quick. But that's not going to help you because if you're turning right, that's the equivalent of now turning left, turning out of a parking lot. It's a whole, I could expand on that for a while. But either way, it is funny. I didn't actually think about it. The first car I ever drove that was right-hand drive was also a Volvo wagon.
That's so funny. I always remembered it as like, all right, well, just if you're in a right-hand drive car in a right-hand drive country, just make sure that you're on the same side as the middle, because it's the same as the left-hand side. You're always driving towards the double lines, or you're always on the side of the double line. So just like just flip it. And if you're in a right-hand drive car and a left-hand drive, you're like, oh, I just need to be next to the curb now.
Right.
So that's the way I kind of viewed it.
It's
But
positioning your body because you're so used to counteracting for like, hey, the whole right side of the car is over here, so you kind of count for it. Now all of a sudden you like it's about being not positioning yourself as if you're in a left-hand drive and shearing off the left side of the car.
Exactly.
So here's a fun fact.
I got some.
Do you know why
in the chat here?
Do you know why
James?
they go in England specifically? Why they drive on the left side of the road versus why we drive on the right-hand side of the road?
Because we dumped their tea out into the Boston Harbor at some point.
Well, at one point it was literally an FU to England, but they drive on the left-hand side of the road, and not to go down another history rabbit hole, but the short version of it is they always pass. If you have oncoming, they would go on the left because everybody was trained to be right-handed, and that was your sword hand. So that if you had to, you could draw and they be there, as opposed to crossing yourself to fight with a sword or what have you. So that's why that's kind of stuck there. And again, it was us saying F you to the Brits, and we did it the opposite.
Leave it to England to be like, we're gonna make our driving because of how our sword play is.
Well, to think about it, it's the evolution of transportation, right? You're riding on horse. Then this new thing comes, the car comes around, or like, all right, well, since we're in a car, we're going to do things different.
Well, you're on a horse. You're in a McLaren F1. You're constantly in the center driving position.
That's the optimal driving position for either sword.
If you need to have mounted sword battle, the McLaren F1 is a poor choice of vehicle.
Another strike against the worst car ever made, the McLaren F1.
Hey, people come here for real consumer advice, and I can't,
Yeah. Also, just kidding. The McLaren F1 is the best car ever.
Doug asked if I hadn't driven any pre-war right-hand drive cars before that. And it's interesting because also, even though we had kind of established the side of the road we were going to drive on over here, back in, especially before, definitely before World War II, auto manufacturers were as common as, microbreweries are today. There were thousands of auto manufacturers. And there was no standard to where things would go. So that meant steering wheel, what order the gears were in, what pedals did what. Each manufacturer kind of did their own thing. It was a long time before, I believe it was like Cadillac set the standard. They're like, nope, steering wheel's going to be on the left, gear shifter's going to be on the right, and that's just going to how it's going to have to be. Because there really were a ton of brass era stuff. If you look at it, it doesn't matter whether it was made here or in Europe or whatever. Every single one of them has a different driving configuration. And it's wild to think that these things that we kind of take for granted nowadays really weren't standardized until later than you think. So even the certain things, like my dad's got the first full production year of Corvette, the 1954 Corvette, and those were only straight six and only automatic, right? And by then it's the 50s. We've got it all figured out, right? Nope, the shift pattern for the automatic is different than it is in like a normal car. Park is all the way to the back, and it's like park neutral reverse drive or something. It's something like that. And like these things that we all kind of don't think about weren't standardized until pretty much, I think I'm going to say like the mid 60s is when people stopped fooling around with driver configuration stuff. Obviously it was the Wild West before that, but it is just fascinating how quickly the automobile, not only technologically as far as drivetrains and everything else goes, but even just as a driver, the fact of like, hey, I know now that I could get in practically any newer car and drive it and figure out where things went. That's a recent enough thing. Of course, though, and I don't want to necessarily get into a whole side convo here, but now that's the problem. We've run out of things to invent. So if you look at newer cars, that's all they've done is they've reinvented the way to shift gears. So it's either a dial, a pull tab, like the new Yukons. It's a window switch, but it's on the dash practically. Any BMW, for whatever, they've always been like, no, it's going to be this weird way of doing it because you need to feel special. So the only thing we have left now is to return to making it weird to drive these different cars. And I do think it's kind of interesting as a pre-war guy and a modern car enthusiast that there's a ton of now modern cars that I unfortunately have to look at people like my uncle, who's the best. And if you've watched my channel at all, very smart, very mechanically inclined. But if you put him in a car that's made after like 2018, he's going to have to like Google how to put it into gear because he wants a gear shift and he wants to put on the foot on the brake and pull it down and you're good to go. And it's like, yeah, well, that's not the case. You got your Hyundais with your Sapphire, dial, and there's so many different things. Everyone's trying to reinvent how to put the car in gear. But like I said, most people, I know it's hard for us to believe, most people only have one car and they have that car and they drive it to death for 8 years and then they get something else. So it's a weird transition for them at first, but it's not that weird. Most people aren't switching around cars all the time, so it's not that big of a deal. But as a person who does switch around cars all the time, it is an interesting phenomenon to see falling back into yeah, I'm in one of these. I need to think about what this is now. Yeah. Wasn't a problem in the mid 2000s.
To sort of transition nicely out of that, like Saab and Volvo are two of those companies that always were quirky in that respect. They always had some weird thing, but it always made sense in a certain way. Yep. Like it's strange to someone that drives like Cavalier from the 90s or the 2000s. Like, okay, this is a very straightforward, bare bones kind of car. And then you hopped in like a Saab 9.5 and you're like, what on earth is this spaceship? Because it had weird like crosshatch freaking AC vents that had like a knob on it and you had no idea how to turn it or like do anything with. And then it also had like the jet start key. So it was in the down in the center console and you had to turn it. Like the Porsches are famous on the left-hand side. The Saab was famous for, born from jets. So it was always in the middle. You had to turn it and like, it was never on the stalk or the column or anything like that. It was always just in the weird spot. And then they had just like weird switch gear and things like that. Volvo was the same way. They all had, it had, very odd switch gear in certain ways. Yeah. So it was one of those things where like, they were small batch companies, but they all had these like quirks and cool things about them that drew in their like core audience.
But I'll also say though that they maintained that across the brand. It wasn't that one Saab had the center thing. It was all Saabs.
It was all of them.
And if you get in one Volvo, especially from the era, I guess I'm kind of entrenched in the P2 era, but it's like you get in one, you kind of get in all of them. I mean, you're like, oh, once you're in it. But that's the thing is again, using your example, coming from a Cavalier and you get in a C30, you're like, whoa, this is all totally different. But like I said,
because the C30 was basically a Ford, right? I mean, it was the Focus essentially. It was the cross platform for that.
Yeah, it was the Focus with a cool motor, and then
it's right.
A cool flat, dashboard, and then of course Edward Cullen had one in Twilight. We cannot let that. We can't forget about that.
Yes, that's right. Chad was very Team Edward for a long time.
I'm still Team Edward, and they don't even have, I'm not even. There's not even a fight about that anymore.
Oh man, I'm Team Bella. I like Kristen Stewart. I'm down with
that. Well, there you go. And she won either way. It was gonna be fine.
She had her pick of the list.
Yeah. Here's what I will say about the C30 is a couple of things. Number one, I hated the key. Absolutely could not stand that key.
It was like little chode key.
It was terrible. It had no purpose. It had no purpose other than it was that step between a normal key and a push button start. Because let's face it, it's a little piece of plastic that was sending an RF signal to tell the car to start. But it was so bulky and I could not. I hate that was like between that and the fact that they decided to put what felt like a truck transmission in it were the two biggest things I did not like about that car. It's just, the throws was a full arm workout, and
you should drive it.
They were very long.
What's that?
Yeah, I mean,
I said you should drive a pre-war Ford. They're that's
the throws are the length of the car.
Yes, no. Comparative to its size, it's like you're gonna give me a sporty little like Mini Cooper looking thing, and then have that long of a throw. I agree. But
Yeah.
they are nice. And they came and went so fast. That's the only thing that sucks. I think they're a pretty cool little car.
Oh, 100%,
But
100%. And it was,
you know,
they're, I say this all the time. I mean, we were talking like algorithms, all this other sort of stuff or what have you. That was the reason I got my C30. I had a soft spot for a Focus because my first two cars were Focuses, and that effectively, burden of knowledge or what have you, figured out that, hey, this is just a Focus with kind of a quirky,
it's just the coolest version of a Focus you can get.
and it had a stout little engine, and there was people doing cool things with them. I was like, wait a minute, the all-wheel drive swap in those is as close to a Lego type of a thing as you're going to get in cars. It's, I think, the oversimplification, because from like the wheels down, the C30,
the shirt as a diagram is amazing.
the S40, the V50, they're all the same vehicle basically from the waistline down. So the C30 has a tunnel going through it for a drive shaft. So you can literally get an all-wheel drive S40, V50, or what have you, bolts pretty much in. All the stuff is there. And then I think it's like 3/8 of an inch. You have to raise the motor just to make room for stuff or what have you. Obviously,
not a lot.
Very, very simple. The pioneer of that, and arguably the man who has forgotten more about Volvos than I will ever know about anything in my life, Rich Forsyth, who I was lucky enough to get to know while I owned the C30 and everything. He was kind of the pioneer of that or what have you. And Chat knows this all too well, but he's one of those guys where he could say, all right, put your hand here in the car, turn it. Now rotate your arm a little bit. Feel that like knob thing that doesn't feel like it should be there. Yeah, turn that a quarter turn to the left. Like I was getting flashbacks of that watching your video on the boost issue you were having with the V70R. Because I was having a boost issue with the C30, and he was like, I think this one was adjusting the wastegate, and it's very similar. You go and you turn it, and I wasn't as precise as you. It's like, all right, well, if all the way, and let's see what happens. And
mine was way too tight for that. I was like, oh my god.
I mean, as most things in that engine bay, it was a quarter turn at a time, not even, but. And then it turned out that my boost issue was leaky something on top of the turbo or what have you. And we got that fixed, and then I plumbed the TCV valve backwards, and it was like,
oh, thank you for for all those watching, that's my next Volvo video. I have a TCV valve in a box ready to go.
Oh, nice. So the OEM unit or the Pierberg, or not the Pierberg unit?
I'm pretty sure it's the OEM unit. It's been too long since I've ordered it. That's the thing. It's been sitting, but I have it in my office. It's an FCP unopened box.
Nice.
And I'm like, this is the next thing, because it's like, that's the only other thing that'd be going on. I've tightened this thing up, and it's way better. But yeah, I just couldn't. Yeah, that's
a perfect transition, because I want to say there's a comment from Steve in chat. What's up, Steve? Elliot, could you please let us cat owners know where you can find those rad cat shirts you wear?
I did actually want to answer that as well. I was looking at it down here. I saw that. I wish I had a direct answer that there was just like this one source, and that unfortunately, and this is going to kill you guys, the one source that there is my mom. So I don't know.
Yeah,
time for mom to open an Etsy shop.
To that ever.
So this all started out as kind of it's no secret I do enjoy cats. There is that, but because I lack my own merch, I started adopting, making it a thing of like, I'm gonna wear a cat shirt and just really not ever address it on the show or on the channel. And so over time I've amassed, because my mom's like, this one's neat, this one's from I don't know where. I mean, they're all over the internet, wherever else. Like, I mean, Christmas is coming up, and I can almost say my mom probably got me nothing other than a Corvette calendar, and then like some cat shirts that like I said, that I've never seen before, and I'll be like, this is gonna be great.
I mean, the internet was made for cat videos, so I mean, it's just hand in hand at this point.
Like I said, there's a lot. You can go on Teespring, Zazzle, any of those sites. There's a lot of really good ones. Like if you just look up cat shirt. But like I said, some of the stuff that my mom's found, I've been like, this is brilliant, and of course I'm going to wear this. And you're just wearing it in public, and of course my girlfriend's like, do you have to be wearing that? I'm like, I was filming today, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's awesome.
So inevitably, when my own merch comes out, it's gonna just have to involve cats. Um,
Davin,
yeah.
W mom, totally agree.
So
Very
yeah,
W. That's a big dub.
seriously, no, she did it, and she's just like, yeah, I mean, this is perfect for you, and yeah, and now it's just one of those things. Now I have like, I'm actually excited about this particularly because I actually have, I think this is one of like, I want to say no less than 6 cat sweaters that I have, and I don't know if the audio will pick this one up. It actually has like bells
Yes.
on it.
I
So
can hear it.
I've been walking around all day jingling like a cat.
I mean, it tis the season for
'Tis the
ugly
season and
sweaters, and
wings,
that one's the best one I've seen so far this year. It's great, and it's
Thank
not
you.
even ugly. It's just
Oh,
it's
not,
just
yeah, because
glorious.
this was when people got them ironically. I think this is legitimately intended for an elderly lady to wear unironically. So it's not like where they do it now where you can tell they're trying too hard. This is like, nope, this is just like a JC Penney,
No,
sweater from
that's perfect. That's how I got my first ugly sweater. I literally went into my parents' closet and was like, "What on earth is this thing?" And it
yeah.
was literally just woman's sweater, full shoulder pads sewn into the shoulders. It had a Santa with like a big bushy beard on it, and I used that for like 15 years. It was
See, it's the
great.
best because they weren't joking back
No, they
then.
weren't.
It
It
was
was like,
dead
"Oh, I'm gonna wear this.
serious.
It's gonna
Yeah.
look great." And then everyone was like, "No, it's not. It's not
Yeah.
great. But it's
The
gonna be
best.
great in like 20 years when we need ugly sweaters."
Yes. It's the best.
So
No, anyway, continue with your other question. But yeah,
no,
thank you,
that's
Stephen, for
perfect.
asking about that.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. But right before that, we were talking about Volvos, and I think that was a nice transition because we're talking about your V70. So the one biggest question I've had, and we've talked before. We're
Yeah.
friends on Facebook now. We've talked about it and all that stuff. Oh my God, Chad.
That's oh my God, that's perfect.
So
How is that not my shirt?
if you're listening to this, first off, Elliot is wearing an ugly cat sweater, which is not ugly. I think it's wonderful, with 6 cats on it and jingle
Oh, I
bells.
don't know.
Just to paint the picture. Holy crap! There's way more than
It's
6.
full of cats. Dude.
It's like a baker's dozen.
Yeah.
It looks like at this point of cats just on this jingle bell sweater, and Chad has just photoshopped a cat, an orange cat drifting a C70. It looks like
This is awesome.
you have to go watch the stream if you're missing the visual because it's utterly fantastic.
I don't know why it's on fire.
Please
need
make
this
this
image
into
now.
a shirt and sell it.
But
Yeah, so I said I
Thank
just
you,
need
AI.
this image.
You AI image that?
Yeah, literally 30
Dude,
seconds.
I love how there's like I love how there's turbo. There's just flames coming down underneath. It's just like twin turbo, like dump blowing flames.
Oh my God, that
that's
is
awesome.
absolutely brilliant. Does it say? Oh yeah, it looks like it's because it's AI. It's all blurred, but
Yeah.
the passenger seat looks like it's supposed to say Recaro, but it looks like you.
Oh
like
yeah,
some
but it's like
random
a
letters
drunk
and word.
person trying to write Recaro. Yeah.
Holy crap, that is brilliant.
So cool.
That is absolutely brilliant. We need to make a shirt out of that post haste.
Saving image.
So good. Yes,
So good.
Save image. Holy crap. I mean, even if we don't sell that, I want that on a shirt. I would wear that
I
literally
want it
tomorrow.
on a shirt now too. I'm like, well, how is that not my merch?
We'll send you a. I think we have like the option to do samples, so we'll send you a sample.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But that's a good segue into
Yeah.
the whole Volvo conversation because again, like we're friends on Facebook now. We've chatted about it before. Is my biggest question is why a V70R? Because I know why I wanted it. I told it earlier on the podcast stream here. Is like I was into Volvos like earlier on, and they're just cool cars because people like don't expect them to be quick or interesting or fun. They're like, oh, they're the safe company or whatever. But
Yeah.
a lot of people don't know they had like screaming 5-cylinder engines, and they took them racing, and they're just cool in that like sneaky way. So why did you specifically choose the V70R for one of the cars in your collection, which we'll get to after that? I'm curious
Yeah.
about the Volvo first.
So the way that the Volvo came to be is, I mean, as a car guy, I had kind of always known about the S60R and the V70R. It's one of those things because, again, like you kind of mentioned, hey, Volvo's overarching reputation is they're the safe company. They don't make exciting cars. They don't do this. And I always loved that for a few years, and obviously more after that, to a plus or minus extent. For some reason, they were like, no, you know what? We're going to make an M3, competitor. which is just like, okay, that's kind of weird. And then they did it to like such an extreme level on top of that. It's so out of the mold for this company, and they did it so well, and they incorporated so much cool technology, and it was like one of these things that not many people talked about because the internet wasn't what it was now then. And yeah, honestly, if you look back, Top Gear did do a brief piece on the S60R.
Yes.
But then that's it. And then it was never talked about again on like any publication practically ever. And you know, there
because it wasn't an M3.
Right. And like I said,
that's why.
Was like, yeah, and there were a couple of good articles. There were like, but mostly it was the overall theme of the articles is, who is this for? What is this? And I think even unfortunately for everyone, Volvo kind of took that note and they were like, yeah, you're right. We should just go back to what we kind of know. But there was that brief time where they're like, we could make a really cool all-wheel drive. We could do it better. We could do it, you know, with more power. We could have huge Brembos. We could do all of this cool stuff. And we can make us, you know, an estate version of it and still make it manual. And like I said, that was always even a younger version of me. I was like, that is crazy that they made that, because who goes into the dealership wanting a manual station wagon anything, let alone I prefer it to be manual and I want it to be the one with the Brembos and it was like, it was who this car is. I'm so happy that they made it, but who was it for?
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where I had always known about them. I'd always liked them, but it was like, I wasn't actively pursuing them. I will say that this mine fell into my lap as a result of an unfortunate thing that happened. I had just kind of had a car that I just kind of acquired fairly recently on my channel at the time, my Z4, and I had just spent all this money. You know, it was the highest mileage, cheapest one, whatever you want to say, but it was stick shift. It was local, and honestly, it was really had a book of service record. The thing was impressive, and I was like, man, this thing's awesome. It is wheels, suspension, and like not like a drive shaft or something, like I forgot at the time, away from being absolutely perfect. And I had ordered all these things, and we had done it, and I had taken it to Johnny at who's the Car Ninja, if you watch Tyler's channel at all. And I had gone so far as I'd taken the wheels, tires, and suspension over to his shop, because the next day I was driving my Z4 over to him. And that morning at like 10 a.m., I was driving the Z4 over. It was a beautiful spring day. I had the top down. Everything was cool. And I was just going through a stoplight, just going straight, by the way. And somebody at turning left, no joke, mistook the brake for the gas, or mistook the gas for the brake. And instead of, she meant to not turn in front of me, but I was already through most of the intersection. And for some reason, this Civic, I'm not kidding you, floored it into me to just head on me out of nowhere. So it was like they were in the turning lane, just floored it and turned into me. And I was like, it totaled the car. I mean, it really rattled me because I was going like 45. And so I took a 45 mile an hour head on in a Z4. I never got to put any of the parts on. All of a sudden, this car's just trashed. And I was like, man, this kind of stinks. And, whatever else. So, it was I'm lucky I lived through it, first of all, because that's not a low speed accident by any means. But
no.
After all that kind of dust had settled, we had made a video about going to look at the car in where they had taken it. This does tie back into Volvo, trust me. And I was with Tyler, and I had bought my daily driver from Eurasian Bob before. And then Tyler said something. He's like, we're just down the street from Bob's. Let's go look at what he's got. And I was like, okay, sure. And we were kind of bobbing around, not pun unintended. But we were bobbing around because Bob was there. And one of them was like, I think Bob's got a V70R. And I was like, what? And he's like, it's manual too. I was like, he's got a Spaceball V70R, and I knew nothing about it. And he's like, well, he's had it for a while. And then, it was one of those things where Bob was like, well, yeah, well, let me show it to you. And we moved to what I could only describe as the not for sale section of Bob's yard. So Bob has a dealership, and in the back, it is a European junkyard. And I'm not messing with you. There are cars stacked on cars, and it's been a great source of parts. This one was right in between. It was I'm going to part this thing out, but haven't yet section of the thing. And I was like, Bob, and we were looking at it, and the paint was faded. I sent you a picture where grass was growing up all around it. It had been parked in that
I remember
exact
that,
same
yeah.
spot for so long that the paint had baked off of it. He said at one point, some of the passenger side, both wheels had been stolen, but he'd replaced them. And it was like all this stuff. And he was like, man, I just can't, like, I can't. The thing had been, I think, given a salvage title because it got hailed on. Like it was before they were like worth anything. So like in like 2010 or 11, it had gotten hailed on,
Oh
and it was
yeah.
fine. And so like he kind of parked it then, and then it started having electrical issues because the sunroof leaked, and it was like one thing or another. Where Bob was like, he was like, I am going to park this car out very soon, or whatever else. And I said, Bob, well, what's wrong with it? And he was kind of saying, I don't really know. It runs enough and blah blah blah. And I just made him a deal. I said, Bob, listen to this. I had to go out of town, and I said, Bob, if I loved the car. I was like, okay, there's not a lot of these. There's no non-swapped Spaceball V70Rs, let alone local to me. Yeah. And I just told Bob, I was like, I don't care. I was like, I have to leave town. I'm coming back in like 3 or 4 days. I was like, if I can drive it out of here, I will buy it for you or from you for, this price, whatever it was. And he was like, okay, whatever, like he's like, I guess I'll put a battery in it and try it and whatever else. And then I get a call from Bob while I'm in Arizona, and he's like, you'll never believe this, but it starts. It runs. He's like, it does work. And he was kind of going, I regret agreeing to that price now, and everything else. And I was like, well, and I didn't really know what I was getting into. I just knew that I thought they were cool. I had just lost a car that I had been fully delved into as a project, and I'm like, well, now there's this. But I had no idea what I had stepped into as far as enthusiasm and support from a community. I've kind of talked about this from the VinWiki page. Like I brought home this kind of what I knew was cool, but I was like, all right, it doesn't run that well. Like driving it from Bob's to my shop, I mean, it was running on 4 cylinders probably. It was not a smooth ride, but it did the job. I was able to drive it home, and once I got it kind of stage zeroed, I was like, all right, this thing is pretty awesome. But of course, with everything else in the project, you start unlocking the next phase of things that was wrong with it. And unfortunately for mine, once I got it fully mechanically, mostly sorted, that's when all the electrical problems started. And I could go in on that for later. But what I want to talk about from the positive side here is what I didn't know is how popular a weird car could be. Because what I thought would be, hey, no one knows what these are. There's no way people are going to watch a video on them. That's kind of, that's the general YouTube thing. Sometimes you're like, hey, if most people haven't heard of this, most people aren't looking into it. But for some reason they are. And like I said, because of you guys, you paved the way. There were a lot of people that were, missing your guys' content or whatever it may be. That they were like, all of a sudden
it was sort of the same for us. Like we just threw it up there and people like gravitated towards it. So you find those like niche cars and people just like, it doesn't matter. Like we were talking earlier about like the personality, like you're obviously very engaging. You're a great presenter. Like I like to think that we're like semi-decent presenters, but people just gravitated towards that particular car. And I go back and watch some of our older stuff, like on the V70R2. I'm just like, man, this is cringy.
Oh yeah.
But it's still like, but it still even like gets views today because it's just still a weird but very
Sorry, here's one of the cats.
Extra cat now.
She jumped up, so here she is.
We have added cat. We have added.
Yeah, now we have real live
cat. Live cat. That's right.
But anyway, what I do want to say, and like I said, you included with this, is I was used to online, even in the comments section, the forums, whatever you have it. If I made a video with my BMW, it's kind of almost a meme with BMW owners now. And that it's one of those things where they go, ha, you're suffering, suffer with us. And like, that's what they do.
Yeah.
And it's not unlike the Mercedes community. They do the same thing. I have my Mercedes wagon. They kind of go, of course it's doing that. And they all do that, but there's no solution. They're just kind of like, ha, like I said, suffer like we all suffer. But with the Volvo community, it was like, all of a sudden I made a video and people were having the single most helpful, kind and constructive comments ever. They were like, oh, here's what's actually happening. You should look into this. Whatever it was. And I was like, okay, that was very nice. And then I found a bunch of those comments. And I'm like, this community is being oddly helpful. And it, you know, like all of a sudden it was like, and then every video I made was a version of that, and I'm like, what is going on? Like, not only are people loving that this car is being featured, but every comment is a possible solution to whatever was going on. And I mean, without no joke, like without the comment section on a lot of those videos, I would have been fairly like aimless because all of my like car
Yeah.
troubleshooting, I was like, I don't know, you know.
100%. It was the same for us. Like we were getting into it, and they're like, "Oh, you gotta do a full PCV check, do the glove test." And I'm
Yeah.
like, "What the hell is a glove test?" So I look into it, and all the comments were just so helpful, and that I think just speaks volumes to specifically the Volvo community. And we've talked about it a lot on this stream and podcast before because we've been doing this for almost 2.5, 3 years now, where we've obviously done Volvo stuff, and I believe it was who was it in chat before here? It was I think Ralph actually had said, "Loving the car behind you." This is my V60 Polestar, and this car is part of the reason why I'm still in the Volvo community, but also the Volvo community is still why I have this car. It is the single best car community I've ever been a part of by a wide margin. And not to say that other car communities aren't great. I've been involved in many other car communities that have been great. The Subaru WRX community, specifically, I have a lot of still friends from there. They've been fantastic. It's not all just vapes and monster sponsorships there. There's a lot of great people there.
Yes, it is.
But shut up, Dad. but the Volvo community specifically, like there are some bad apples in there, sure, and I've encountered those. But like it's more helpful and friendship than saying, "Oh, haha, you're having a bad time with your car, join us." It's like it's not that. It's just been this swath of like interest and helpfulness and friendship, and it's just been fantastic to be a part of. So huge shout to buy a Volvo, not just because they're safe cars, but also because they're interesting, and you're gonna like meet people because of it, and they're probably gonna be good people too. Which is
rare in a very unfortunately gatekeepy kind of community that the car world can be. Now, I do want to comment on this because Davin, the guy with all the cool Nissans and pre-war stuff, or not pre-war stuff, but JDM stuff, he said, "Is it a Volvo Polestar or the Polestar?" And for those of you who don't know, Polestar is Volvo's like they've now made it its own brand. So that's a whole different thing. I mean, what fascinated me, by the way, and I haven't made the video on this, you know what they had at Hertz in Miami at the airport? They had a Polestar 1 that you could rent. I was like,
what?
Oh my God, it was just there. I was like, I could have rented this?
Those like, things Polestar are like 2s, still $120,000. I know, so it was
like Polestar 2s, whatever. But they had a Polestar 1 just like right there as like walking to the gold member desk. I was like, what?
Holy crap, I would have mortgaged something to like actually be able to rent that.
I was so stoked about it. Yeah,
they're just cool. They're not fast, but they're just cool.
Oh, it does. It's so cool. And like I said, I'm a sucker for like little things like this. Like I love what they did in the trunk, making that little clear section with the high voltage wires. Like it's so cool.
So you can see. Like no one does that. No one thinks like, here's what's going on.
Yeah.
By the way, you're gonna want to look at this.
And
like
sure, it's just cool. Like some wires, the ones that could kill you. But like they made it look cool. Like that's what's cool. Make it cool. Exactly. I'm all for that.
But that's again also why I have this car, because it's cool because not a lot of people know what it is. And I get compliments on it all the time, and that not a humble brag. It's just like people hear it in my neighborhood because it's got a great exhaust. And for those, this is the Polestar. It's not a Polestar engineered. Well, it's not a Polestar tuned one. This is engineered by Polestar. So this is the one that Polestar. So the history of it is Polestar was Volvo's race team at one point. And then they became their sort of M or AMG division, and now they're the EV brand. They still have a race team. It's now called Cyan Racing, but it's that sort of evolved that way. So Polestar became the M division, and that's where this car is from. That's the era. Is they made the V60 and S60 sort of the same way that the V70R and S60R were back in the day, but it was given to Polestar. They apparently made over 80 changes to it, of which the only one that I know the great stat on is they made the springs 80% stiffer than the R Design version, which you absolutely can feel.
Honestly, seems like too stiff. 80% stiffer is like, we made it so that there's only 20% suspension left.
Pretty much, yeah. It's and Chad still has yet to drive my car, but I just drove his car, and we'll talk about his car in a second. But he owns a 700 wheel horsepower Mustang GT S550 version, which is utterly fantastic. And I'm like, now I want to reconsider my attainable dream car. Like that was that drive for me. But
I got Greg on the V8 train.
This car is stiffer than that car, and that car is on coilovers. And
now,
I'm
Grayson, I do want to mention one other thing that Volvo is still doing, although they dropped like the R as its own thing.
Yeah.
What Volvo's doing that nobody or not a lot of other people are doing now is they have like the triple power adder threat that nobody else has. I mean, you can get an XC90 that is turbocharged, supercharged, and hybrid.
Yes.
I mean, that's
which is
nuts.
Wild.
That's nuts. No other brand is going, hey, we're going to do all three of those things. Like they at most pick two. And most of the time, not even that.
Which usually brands are just like, we shouldn't do all three of those things because it's probably a bad idea. And Volvo's like, nope, we're going to do it.
Well, there's an idea for the next.
Do supercharged and turbocharged. And then nowadays they're like, and then throw an electric motor in there too.
Yeah.
Well, there's an idea for a project.
Be a torque gap, the supercharger. You know, like there shouldn't be one. Like, but there is. Make it faster. Like it's so cool.
It's cool, but it's so weird.
The 4 horsemen.
I can't wait because if we're complaining about how complicated and unreliable the R is from the early 2000s, I do not envy the people in 15 years who get a triple charged XC90 and they're like, "What's wrong with it?" And you're like, "Well, it could
everything.
Be one of a lot of things."
Well, you see, we have 3 branches of government.
Yeah, it literally is. Like you're talking about 3 major things that could be happening, and then we haven't even really talked about the all-wheel drive system or anything else.
Add NOS, just put NOS to it.
Yeah.
Make it 3 power adders, 1 engine.
That's our thing, Greg. Since nobody's done it yet. You get a triple charged Volvo, and you're like, I'm going to add the 4th thing to it.
Yes.
It's one step away from being what I would call, like how they have the bathroom, you have your all-purpose bath thing that's shampoo, conditioner, and body wash. It's only one toothpaste away from being all-purpose liquid.
Just have a scene of Thanos dropping the last Infinity Stone in.
It literally is.
Like, and the 4th thing is like, away. It's a shampoo, conditioner, toothpaste, and ketchup now. So
that's
it's
what
like,
I'm saying. I'd be like,
and degreaser,
and it's all I've ever needed.
Yeah, an all-purpose degreaser. Yeah, like that's what we should do. We should buy a triple charge and be like, I bought the fastest, most crazy horsepower thing ever, and I just added a bottle of NOS to it. Like, it's just
I'll have to have
wild.
a lot more money before I can certainly blow that up. But I think only a 5-shot, I think, is all it would take. But
Chad, what were you going to say? You were saying, what about the next project car?
Oh, that's what I'm saying. The next project car is the 4 horsemen of power adders. Supercharger, turbocharger, hybrid, and then NOS.
Yeah, Ralph just goes, it's ultra charged. That's the perfect thing to call it.
That's
the ultra charged Volvo.
Steve,
I love that. I'm super down. I just wish
like engine oil and burnt coolant. It's like, well,
I mean,
wasn't that your fragrance of choice for a while, Steve? The essence of broken down Jeep.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, Steve's one of our regulars. He just sold his. I want to say it was an X. What was the code for the boxy Cherokees? XJ or
XJ? I do believe.
I think it was an XJ Jeep, and just sold it for a CRV. I'm just like, as much as I want to say that was a bad call, that was literally the best call of your entire existence, because the CRV is a way more reliable car than any boxy XJ ever hoped it could be. So. Anthony XJ ZJ. What's this DJ? If you don't know, you can't afford it. Great movie. 99 Grand Cherokee. So it wasn't a regular. It wasn't a boxy Cherokee.
Oh, that has a whole different body code thing that I
also drastically unreliable. Both of them.
Yeah, so I had an 01 back in high school. And that was like my only non-sports car that I ever really had, and then I got in trouble for jumping it. So,
jeez,
there we go.
So I have something that I wanted to talk to you about, because we talked about the V70R. So really quick,
hold on, before we get off the Volvo real quick, he's mentioned it a couple of times, and Greg, because we've talked about this past. Elliot, what is your honest opinion of the Spaceball shifter as a mechanism to change gear?
That's such a loaded question. I love it.
I think the sigh at the beginning sort of said everything.
No, I really do like it. Okay, so here's the deal. The first time I ever drove one was my own, right? And I will say this. It was missing the little grommet that goes between the actual shifter and the ball part of the Spaceball.
Oh, yeah,
so
I hate
every
that.
time I shifted, it was doing the clack, clack. And then, so the ball was always kind of just, loose and I didn't know that was not how it was supposed to be. So I was kind of thinking, I was like, this just seems like it's making an unnecessarily after the fact clacking noise after I've shifted gears.
You're not wrong.
But the thing is, I think the way it looks outweighs any of the shifter feel, because at the end of the day, it is a cable driven shifter. Mm-hmm. I don't think a lot of those have like a super great, really cool, authoritative feeling. There's not a lot you can do to them to make them feel that way. So I kind of like the fact that instead of just putting a rubber boot on it like everybody else does, is at least it looks really cool and unique, and it doesn't make a rubber squeaky sound when you shift it. It makes a clack. I don't think that, like I said, there's ever going to be a version of a Spaceball that feels, wow, I really felt like I for sure put it in the correct gear that time. But it does, I don't know, it just does feel more special than a boot-driven. So it's less special than a gated manual, but it is more special than with a leather boot and certainly.
I'm sure one of our regulars will absolutely be able to pull this up. But I always thought so my thoughts on the space, it just felt clunky, like whatever. But I always thought, let's one up this and let's get someone who's an actual decent artist to airbrush the Death Star on.
That's a cool idea. So to answer Mark's question, I did get a 3D printed grommet or bushing, and I have had it in there for a long time now, and my initial thoughts are in the past. Like, I do have it securely to the rod now.
Phrasing.
That's just to answer that. I didn't let that go. Thankfully, again, back to the helpful Volvo community. I didn't even know that it was wrong. And somebody goes, I can hear it. You're missing the bushing. And I'm like, huh. And then the guy just sent me a thing. He goes, here's a link. And I was like, what? Well, how about that?
It's insane that guy, Rich Forsyth, I was telling you about. A contact, you're definitely. Yeah. He works at Volvo Cars West Houston. He's Moose Tech 1 on all social media. He's definitely a guy.
Oh, I've definitely read some of his stuff then.
He's a really awesome guy. You can reach out to him, and he's that Volvo community, right? This is Mr. Volvo as far as I'm concerned, right? And he's happy to help so many people out in the community or anything. But he was able to tell that my C30 had a caster issue from like a 7-second clip on one of my videos.
Unbelievable.
He was like, your caster's off.
There are car people that are just savants. Rich is one of those people
that is
he's just
way
a savant
nicer
about
way
Volvos.
than I was going to put it.
Yeah, it's wild how he can just look at something and be like, yeah, that's your issue, and it is the issue in like a 7-second clip. It's just bananas.
Yeah, so I have that. I always call it, and it's not as nice. I always just call it car autism, because I just because there'll be things especially when I go to a big city, like your Scottsdale's, your Car Week or anything like that. I mean, I'll look at something and I'll be like, oh my God, it's one of these and it has this package, blah, blah, blah. And I can see it just when it drives by. And so if I'm just with non-car people, they're like, okay. And I'm always like, no.
They're just like, oh, cool. That one was purple.
Yeah. And like I said, my girlfriend will always be like, hey, that one's special. Like, she can at least recognize the shape of one that's it's not a Kia Rio. So it must be, up there. And so I'm always be like, yeah, that's a 675 LT. I can't believe that there's just one driving around, and you're like, how did you know what that is? And like I said, to girls, unfortunately, that's the best example I have. It's just like, yeah, you just screamed out letters and numbers. And I'm like, yeah, I did. You're right. And that's I know it seems bizarre to be excited about that. I mean, even what we're talking about, if I just yelled out, "Holy crap, that's a V70R," people who are not car people are like, "All right,
Cool. What is
yeah,
that?
yeah." My mom has a CRV, and S2000 is pretty cool because that's a higher number than I normally hear.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. Yeah. What's the 9999? Is that the new Gretzky? Like what?
yeah,
Like
they're like, it's
they
all
don't
the
understand. They don't understand. It's just
yeah,
and same thing in the Volvo community. It's like, oh well, that's engine code BT5T 4T XT 3T 2T 1. Like
right.
I'm just
And you're
like,
like,
I can't. It's a really simple engine
yeah.
code system. I still don't even
Like
know
I
it.
say,
But
and
like,
then I'm blessed. People have certainly gravitate towards certain brands that they're really, really good at. And then, of course, like the guy you've been talking about, he is the absolute guru on Volvos. Like I
yeah,
gravitate towards Corvettes as like the thing where I'll be like, I know everything about all of them, from this date back. But like there's obviously people who know about more than me, but it's like that's my brand of like where I can be like, that's not right, or or
right.
whatever it is on something like that. There's other things that I would feel not uncomfortable, saying stuff like that about. But certainly, everybody has their one brand or make or model that they're just absolutely, some of these Civic guys out there, you wouldn't believe how
Yes.
how dialed in they are about some of the stuff. And I'm like, man, I thought I had a familiarity with these. Now I feel like I don't even know what they are.
That's right.
It's wild.
Yeah. Rolf, just really quick. I know, Rolf, you've been really vocal in chat. Thank you so much for joining,
He's
brother. Appreciate it.
reporter.
You're awesome. Thanks for watching. And I'm 100% positive you're sub to all Elvis's stuff, but or Elliot stuff. But please, if you're not, please go follow all of the things. The end. Subtle plug.
Yes.
But yeah, so I actually I had a question, and again, transitioning into like the next two things that I wanted to say was you said that you're like super knowledgeable on the on the Corvette stuff. My question is twofold. So transitioning from Volvos to Corvettes is if you could own any Volvo from any generation, what would it be and why? And then follow up to that is the same question about Corvettes. Apart from what you have owned, like what's your ultimate Volvo to own, and then what's your ultimate Corvette to own?
God, that's a tough one on the Volvo because my knee-jerk reaction would be a perfectly sorted V70R,
Right.
with Atacama interior and all that other cool stuff. I really actually like my, magic blue with Nordcap. I do like that combo. I really want to drive one.
I just love listening to people. It's the bad, like the color codes and all.
Chad, I never knew any of these things before I got mine.
But here's the funniest thing. The funniest thing is I've heard Greg go on and on about this, and like about probably like 3 months into us doing Volvos. And when I say us doing Volvos, Greg was he was at the front, the middle, and like a little bit of the he was leading that charge, right? And he's going on and on, and he's like, "Oh, look at that! It's a blobbity bloobity cap story, blah blah blah, and that's really rad, blah, blah." And like Hanson and I are just looking at each other like, "Do you care? Because I don't."
I do want to point out here, Gregson has a Volvo behind him, and Chad, you're wearing a Volvo shirt. I'm the only one here with no Volvo anything.
That's right. That's right.
Me.
Evidence base. I like it.
But okay, to finish it out anyway, I would have really liked to have experienced a V70R when they were fresh, like I really would have liked to say a showroom fresh V70R, just to know if it's not that much different than the one that I have, then fantastic. But it's really cool and I love it. My other knee-jerk reaction is that I really always, because I like the way they looked, I love the last generation of the C70. I was just really sad that, like I said, there was no version of it that you could either get all-wheel drive or not. Like I have a hard time because you could get them in stick shift, and they're cool hardtop convertible. And I think other than some of the older, early '60s and '70s Volvos, that was like as sporty of a Volvo ever looked as far as a normal proportion car. And I'm a big sucker for convertibles, and I was like, okay, you can get one in hardtop convertible, stick shift. Like this is awesome. And it was like to learn. He was like, only front wheel drive no matter what. You're like, it's not the end of the world, but I do think that would be like if I were to today get another Volvo, I kind of would seek out one of those because I'm at least familiar with the chassis. I kind of know what's going on. I really would like the convertible factor. And being in Kansas, as much as I would like to, as far as the all-wheel drive usefulness goes, from a non-performance standpoint, it snows here like once a year or twice a year. So I don't ever.
You don't need all-wheel drive.
Yeah, and then the fact is, unfortunately, the Volvo V70, you go, oh, it's all-wheel drive. You're like, you cannot launch it. It will absolutely shred its angle gear the first time you do it, and that's that. So it's like you don't get the dry all-wheel drive performance that you do in like an STI or an Evo, and I don't ever get to use the winter portion of it. So I guess I'd be okay with the C70. I'm just kind of thinking of it normally. The other thing is, as far as things I've always kind of wanted, and it's not a creative answer, but I want to say like the 2014, whenever they did the refresh on the XT60, you could get the R design. I always thought that'd make a really good daily. I think they look really sharp. It's kind of the perfect size of SUV. And they had you could get them with a decent, combination of powertrain. And it's not, like I said, it's not the most exciting answer. And obviously, now that we've been talking, now I've got the idea in my head. All I want is a triple charge XC90, like Insignia, and I want to do the thing. So now that's my official answer now, is either a V70R that's showroom fresh, or an XC90 that I will inevitably ultra charge, as per Ralph in the comments.
I mean, as someone with a twin charged XC90, with a supercharger and turbocharger, it's okay. But it's quick. It's 6.30 to 60, which is only 0.2 slower than a GTI. It's quick. It's definitely quick for a big 6,000-pound SUV with a 4-cylinder. It's quick. Yeah. But the triple charged one, it's 0 to 60 in about 5 seconds, which is about what this thing is stock. It's as fast as a WRX. That's pretty decent straight line performance, and not for a big lumbering SUV.
Not to mention, it really does check a lot of the boxes. The Insignia package is so nice. You're doing everything. You're like, okay, so I'm really fast, and all of my touch points and materials are really nice. City safe, or whatever they call it now, the auto steer kind of function is actually pretty darn good. If you haven't experienced it, it's like I said, it'd be a really great daily driver, but also kind of a fun car and a sleeper in its own way, because it looks like a normal SUV.
True. It's not an X5M, which you can tell, that's a fast.
You can tell right away.
SUV. We get it.
Yeah.
Now, so then same question on the Corvettes then.
The Corvette thing, now I could definitely go even more long-winded on this answer. This is a tough call, because I always err towards get the newest, best thing you can, which obviously now would be
C7.
Previously the Z06. Yeah, well, I know. So it's that this is what I'm saying. This is why
I knew Chad was going to say C7.
So you go, hey, do you want to go the last of the where the engine belongs Corvette, or do you want to go with the mid-engine stuff? So I, though, am going to be a bit of an outlier here. Again, my gun to my head answer is a very late, 94, 95 C4 ZR1, because they only made a couple hundred of those.
Yeah.
And they were made on a separate assembly line than the other ones. They were so much different about them, and the C4 itself is such a departure from what they had been doing. I mean, if you look at it, like I said, I don't want to dive too far into it, but the C3 lasted from 1968 until 1984, is when the C4 came out.
Long run.
It was a long time of them being body on frame, old school cars. And the C4 came out, and they were this Indy car. I mean, they're very looked down upon now as C4s in general. The ZR1 stands apart, but it's still the same kind of platform. They were so far ahead of their time. They were so cool. I mean, the ZR1, like I said, so far beyond the regular C4 that people still have a hard time comprehending it, because there wasn't a Z06 of the time. There wasn't anything. The ZR, that it literally was an options package that practically, it was I believe even in 1990, it was a $33,000 option.
Wow.
So you basically added another Corvette onto your Corvette to make it the ZR1, but it was so different and special. Like I said, there's even a circle back to the beginning of the pod. There was a great Jason Camisa episode on the early ZR1s.
Oh yeah.
Now I like the later ones. They made a little bit more horsepower, and they were a lot more rare. And I thought they looked a little bit better with their 5-spoke wheels and stuff like that. And I have some early childhood memories around them. So like there's a lot of history that I know that I love about the car, and I know the C4 is special enough to me, and everything else, and they're comfortable, and the regular ones fine, but you add the ZR1 package to it, it's still modern day fast. But that being said, the other thing that kills me is that the E-Ray is out now, or going to be probably by this time is out. And the thing that kills me is I love this because it's everything that I would want in a Corvette, because it's, well, no matter which way you get it, it's mid-engine, dual clutch transmission, the roof comes off. Those are pretty much my three like things of, all right, this is a supercar that I want now. And I know it's tough to call it a supercar, but then you add the hybrid factor in, and the fact that it's all-wheel drive, and this one, it does actually make it faster. It's amazing. And you're talking to a guy who, like it or not, drives a Prius every day. So this is basically the Corvette Prius. Like, I could literally, if I wanted to, have a very short commute. I could drive to work in electric only, or at the press of a foot, have a 600 plus horsepower absolute animal at my fingertips. I mean, it's literally the best of both worlds. I was like, I mean, the fact that even exists, I'm like, it's right. And also, it's not fully electric, so nobody can get fully mad at you. But it's, you can
met
go
the
electric,
internet,
but I can have the bark of a V8 at my beck and call. It's literally, like I said, it's the best of both worlds, and it's this brief moment in history that is going to go away really quickly, and I love that for it. I'm like, okay, it can exist in between both, and it represents both in the coolest way. It's not doing one or the other. It's going, hey, what's the coolest way we can combine these? And it does it, and I love that.
Right. I think, and honestly, I think we can kind of put it to rest. Not that anyone hasn't put it to rest, but the C8 is a supercar. Like just flat out. Even the base model is putting out under 3-second 0 to 60s. Like it's a supercar at this point. It's a mid-engine supercar.
And
that's just what
when
it
you
is.
see
It's
one on the
competing
road
against Ferraris. It's a supercar.
When you see them on the road, it's just, I mean, I know it's part of the look of the design of mid-engine cars, but you can't even go, it's different than when you see a normal Corvette. You look at that and you go, whoa. Like,
Correct.
Even though it's, kind of,
it goes back.
Chad and I are in the same camp.
The original supercar. It goes back to the original supercar. What was the original supercar? It was the Mura. What was it? Mid-engine.
Mura.
Right.
And so when you put the engine in, okay, so I know, like, what was it? Speaking of Camisa, I think I saw this there. Or like the Fiero. It was mid-engine, but it was done for fuel economy. Whatever. But 99.9% of the time, mid-engine equals sports, if not burgeoning on supercar.
Yep.
And
every time, practically.
Look.
Right.
Other than the MR2, the MR2 and Fiero are like the only two things that are like.
Greg will tell you one of my dream builds, if I ever hit the lottery, would be to take a second-gen MR2, get rid of the arguably very good Toyota 4-cylinder. Not arguably, it is a great motor. Throw that away and put a white block in it.
Yeah.
So having the 5-cylinder turbo that you have, when you put an exhaust on those things, they sound epic. Like that noise, little bit like that would be like one of the weird sort of super built. Like if I won the lottery, you wouldn't know, but there'd be signs. It's like, Chad, why'd you buy an MR2? Oh,
don't worry about it. Also, I'll see you in 6 months, and there will be almost no exhaust on my car.
Now, I do want to call this out because Steve mentioned in the chat, and he's absolutely correct. My last video, my latest video is with a C8 Corvette, which is very funny that we're even talking about them. But the whole thing is that last C8 Corvette I had, and I'd driven them before, I just hadn't done like an extensive video about them, is that one was extremely abused and or already broken. I don't even know how to describe it. If you two haven't watched it, it's at least interesting because that's what happens when you rent a car, on Turo sometimes is, you never know. But this particular C8 was not in good shape. It didn't do the C8 things. If you watch the video, it does do the C8 things as far as It ran and drove and it went fast, but it had silly doors. The electronics were way jacked up. And like I said, who knows, kind of questionable ownership. That is what you can expect a lot of C8s to be like in 20 years. I just got to experience it very, very early. Now, the thing that sucks is that there's a lot of people who will rent that same car who will have never even driven any Corvette and let alone a C8. And they'll go, this is how they all are. They all must be like this, because that's a reasonable expectation to have. You go, I've never had one of these. It's pretty new. What's the problem? And then you drive that one. It has a bunch of problems. So now you've got a bad taste in your mouth for an already kind of controversial car. That's it's not exactly fair. And obviously I didn't do it any favors by making a video on it, but
well, you're bringing exposure to it too, as well.
I was also calling out that particular car, not the C8
right,
as a platform. I mean, I hopefully made a good enough point in there that I was like, I've driven these. This one's kind of odd in that aspect, but I still maintain a lot of its problems were about its livability, not about its drivability. Like as a car, it still drove fine. Although again, if you watch the video, we didn't learn until a couple of days in that it had completely mismatched rear tire sizes and that's why it was squirreling around as such. But again, that's not the car's fault. That's
a human's fault. And that's like,
yeah,
that reminds me. So when I got my Mustang from the dealer, they had the rear tires on the right side and the front tires on the left side. So I'm like on the highway and it's going to the left. Or I'm like, what is going on? And I bring it back. They're like, oh, sorry. And I'm like, yeah, about that. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I knew this car had some foibles, and that there's a reason I got it for the price. And my front bumper, for example, needs to be replaced. But I knew that, and part of the plan was always to replace the bumper. I didn't anticipate going down the rebuild everything from the back of the engine to the wheels, save for the diff and the wheel bearings. I didn't expect that to happen. And, well, frankly, as most things in cars, you're like, oh, that cost way more than I thought it was going to.
Yep,
but
that happens.
It's crazy to me that some people, like, you have a Corvette, you're going to put it on Turo. It's obviously a car people are going to want, right?
It's desirable, yeah.
And you want to make it. It's just like anything else. Put the best foot forward, because, I mean, I guess it's a cash grab. Like, if anything like this, it's like, hey, you want this? Great. Here's the lowest possible version of it.
But that's what sucks, is because like they don't look at it as they're representing the brand. They look at it as like, I'm going to get money whether or not, because I have something that outwardly appears desirable. Because if you look at Turo, and I've never even actually thought about this before, it's kind of the dating website of rental cars. You're scrolling through and looking for like, hey, which is the most attractive thing here? Yeah. And guess what? I mean, I definitely went for it. I'm like, hey, this one is like very ostentatious and like crazy showy as a person who's looking for a thumbnail. And then like I was like, the price is pretty undeniable. And then I'm like, okay, and like the reviews seem good. I'm like, all right, fine. And then you get there and it's just 100% misrepresented. And I mean, what are you going to do about it? But all I can think about is,
so you got catfished.
Yeah, but the thing is, I'm lucky because I've experienced the car. I already had, like a thing. If it was my very first Corvette I'd ever driven, I would be like, I don't know about these. Like, so they don't think about that. You might be ruining somebody's dream car for 15 people down the line.
If it's on Turo, no one cares about that. They just want to rent their car. And most people on Turo there's been several articles by large journals, like New York Times levels journals that have said, these Turo renters are very scammy in that way, and they sort of misrepresent the cars. There's been a lot of crackdown on it from a journalism standpoint over the last like 2 or 3 years, because people are buying up swaths of cars and renting out like 20, 30 cars at a time and making like money hand over fist on it. But the problem is, like, the cars are run down, they're misrepresented, yada, yada, yada. And this sounds like one of those, not necessarily like a scammer or anything, but it just sounds like one of those cars was like, it's just run down. It's not advertised as it should be. It's not what the pinnacle of that car is. So
Well, not only that,
it's one of those things where like,
case, in my particular case though, this is not my first rodeo with Turo, and I don't go on and make my Turo videos to trash them because they're usually not that bad.
right.
My general rule on them is I always say, you rent your dream car on Turo, you're experiencing kind of the worst version of whatever your dream car is because people treat it like a rental. It is 100%. The most worn out, loosest version of whatever you thought it was going to be. This one was like, it's so new that there was like very few excuses for it. And then also the guy, I rented it from the guy, he had a Huracan convertible in the garage and this was still like not, and then, like I said, I messaged him being like, hey, the top doesn't work, expecting him to be like, oh my gosh, let me give you a partial refund, something like that. And he was just like, yeah. Like, and I was like, well, no, yeah. So like, it doesn't work. And I specifically rented it a convertible instead of a coupe because I wanted to put the top down. And he was just like, yeah, it needs an update. And I'm like, again, like a little preface.
Right.
Of that.
Like maybe $50 off a day because that's the whole reason I got the car.
Especially because, like I said, I had a girlfriend that wanted a convertible, and she's like, "We can't even put the top down." And I'm like, "Correct." She's like, "Why?" And I'm like, "Well,
it's not my car, so I can't really speak to that."
Yeah, I was like, "Well, something's wrong."
That's so dumb. I don't get. I also don't get why people just do that to not necessarily screw people over, but also just like, what are you benefiting of being like, oh, I'm cool, tough noogies? Like, just say, are you that strapped for cash that you couldn't give me like $25 off, like per day, like on the rental?
In the garage.
Right, exactly.
But so he was also renting on Turo.
But still, even more so to do that, to up the reputation. Like, I hope you gave him a 2 or 3 star after that. Like that sort of thing bothers me because if you're going to have something that you're representing as your own, that you're then lending out to people to say that, oh, my product of me having something personally is valuable to me, so I'm going to make it valuable to you and rent it out to you. It should be not necessarily the most precious upper echelon thing that could humanly be, but it should be functional to the point that I know what I'm getting. And like, the fact that there's no working top is like an unexcusable thing to me because that's part of the point of the car.
Well, also, like I said, especially when there was a price differential between C8 Coupe and C8 Convertible, I'm like, all right, so the Coupe, I could have easily just been like, all right, well, I'll take the top off. This one was like, you go to press it and it says convertible top malfunction, and you're like, oh my gosh. No, but it's still It doesn't matter. The point is, it's. I think, like I said, I got derailed on the whole thing, but I just think Steve made a good point. As much as I said, my dream Corvette is an E-Ray, it is funny that the last video I made is about kind of more or less bitching about a C8. But like I said, it's not about the platform as a whole. It was that particular C8, and I couldn't believe how bad one could get so quickly if you treat it as such. It's just kind of impressive, I guess. But there's just, and like, again, that's one example. I've had, one of the other things and rented in the same area at a Lotus Elise. Great experience. It had some stuff, but nothing compared to that. Especially also, it's a Lotus Elise, so it's like,
I was just gonna say, it's a Lotus Elise.
It has like two things that like move on it in the first place.
And it's two things on it that move, but also it's a Lotus. It's not going to be functioning 100% at any point in its life.
Right. So it was like, and that's what I said in the video. I was like, I don't know if this is it being British or poor, like a poor ownership. I really don't know. This could be either way.
What's that mean with that little girl? Why not both?
Yeah, it literally was. It was like it's probably both. And I think that even if you try to catch up with Lotus ownership, you're being a cartoon that's constantly plugging the holes in the dam that, are bursting all the time.
Andrew just made a point. Who's one of our buddies from high school, by the way. And hi, Andrew. Thank
any
you for
car
joining.
can get bad quickly.
Yeah, any car can get bad quickly, especially if it's not maintained. there was someone that made a mention on a short that I just made about Nissan's engines, specifically the K15 DDT and the K20 DDET. Apparently, there are a bunch of things going on right now with those particular engines that 450,000 of them they either grenade. I forget what it was. I just made it the other day. But the whole point of that is like this engine was on like Ward's 2018 10 best engines list. It was given awards by ALG. It was given awards by CNET's Roadshow. So like if you don't maintain your car, it's going to break down, period. And the whole thing I mentioned that is there was one commenter on that video, and yes, I still pay attention to a lot of the comments, even on those shorts, even though we get, dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands on some of these shorts, which just go bananas, which I'm eternally grateful for all the views we get on those, which is absolutely insane, by the way. But one commenter said, I'm still on my '07 Altima with 490,000 miles in the original CVT. And I'm like, well, I don't even need to message that person. Like, that person probably maintained their car properly to be able to have that sort of longevity from a CVT Nissan from the mid-aughts. Like, obviously, like if you don't maintain your car, you're going to have a bad time. So, like, maintain your car, do the regular maintenance intervals, and it'll last, especially if it's a modern car. Modern cars are set up beautifully to last a fuck ton of time. So just do the maintenance and change it when the book says, and you'll probably be okay.
I mean, unless you're
now, Gregson, Andrew makes a good point on the most extreme end of this. I would say is he's saying that he works for a large company and he'd be amazed at how fast a new van goes, south. And boy, howdy, you're talking work trucks, anything that's not. It's like that's a step beyond rental car. A work van truck car gets purposely people go out of their way to do the worst possible things to it.
Yes.
So yes,
100%.
I mean these are guys that are like, hey, I started up the van this morning and it sounded like all four pistons were, slapping the firewall, and they're like, whatever, I floored it as soon as I started it, and then it's like, oh my gosh.
Well, of course it's not working. You hucked a 2x4 at the block.
Right.
Like
work vehicles get the worst of it. And I've always sometimes seen I've had a few friends send me, like, not car people, obviously, send me like a Facebook Marketplace thing, and they'll send me like a Chevy fleet truck or whatever, and it's so dirt cheap. And I'm like, yeah.
There's a reason for that.
Yeah, it's dirt cheap because it's either already dead or it's seriously at the worst life possible, and like somebody's getting rid of it for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. Chad, you were going to say something too?
Well, it goes back to that piece you were talking about with the ZR1 vets, the C4s, about how apparently there was someone on the assembly line who was just going from startup to red line, driving them off. And now all the engines got a bad reputation. Look, the modern cars, the mechanicals, if you take care of them, will long outlast pretty much everything else on the car itself. We've pretty much cracked the code on a 2-liter 4-cylinder. They're all pretty much the same, give or take a couple little nuanced things, but they're pretty much the same. There's millions of them out there. It's been hashed out. So if one's getting, I mean, unless you're Ford with like the oiling issues on the Voodoo or the head gasket thing,
unless you're one of the major manufacturers,
right? But
some of the most 2-liter.
Unless you're the only one that wasn't bailed out.
It was. Well, I mean, it's just one of those things where, like, how do you? Again, not to go down this rabbit hole, but how do you make that mistake when we're in a day and age when, again, an internal combustion engine, if you maintain it properly, will last 250,000 miles without really breaking a sweat.
Yeah.
Right.
No, for sure.
That's a good point.
I agree.
I think that's a really interesting transition into what I wanted to talk to you about specifically. And it goes back to the beginning of when we were talking about your worldwide experience and that kind of thing. So Haggerty, again, a channel that you watch, they just came out with their bull market list, and they
Oh,
do the
I
bull
can't wait to
market
get
list
this.
every
Yes.
year since 2018. And I really wanted to get your take on this because of how ingrained you are specifically into sort of the old car market, as opposed to a lot of us, which are more into the modern stuff. But I know a lot of our usuals like a lot of the older stuff. But again, someone with a lot of rich knowledge on the old stuff, the bull market is a thing that Haggerty does because they're an authority on classic cars and classic car insurance and
It's
sort
pretty
of
much what you
upkeep.
go to. Yeah.
Right. It's the go-to for classic cars as far as like if you need knowledge, go to their website. Like they have a ton of stuff. Not sponsored, obviously, but please sponsor Haggerty. Thank you so much. But they've done this every year since 2018. And if you literally just go on Google and search 2024 Haggerty Bull Market List, it'll bring up the article, which I'm sure Chad can project here. But on that article, the whole point of me mentioning this is they have links to 2018 through 2023. And the bull market list is exactly what it sounds like. It is what they believe are the top 10 cars that are going to increase in value majorly starting in 2024. And the list is very wide ranging. There's modern stuff on there. There's lots of older stuff on there. For example, one of the cars on there is as old as a 1946 through 1950 Chrysler Town and Country. So, and and there's one that's modern on there for a 2011 through 2016 Ferrari FF because it's a really interesting, cool clown shoe of a shooting brake. So it's a wide ranging amount of cars from that. My biggest thing is that I think that's actually one of the older ones, Chad, but that's still relevant, so don't take it down. But like they have 2023's list, they had a really bunch of
This
really
article
cool
from
cars, and
December
right in the
7th
middle.
was one of the older articles.
Wait, December 7th of what year?
Not this year.
I saw Murcielago in that
I
list.
was like, wait, is that 2022? Because it usually comes out in December. But this one is from December 11th of this year. And 2023 was good, but that's a great example because right in the middle of that picture that you just showed, or that you were showing, was the Murcielago. And
Which
in
is
2023, the Murcielago went freaking bananas for all valuations across the board. So my whole thing to get Elliot on your thing was your opinion on this list from this year, because there's a lot of really interesting cars, and I want to start it with, in my opinion, the most interesting, which is the 89 Lamborghini Countach 25th anniversary, because it is sort of the bastard stepchild of the Countach in that sphere. So with that one starting to go down the list, what is your opinion on that? Do you agree with them putting that on this list?
So luckily, and like I said, I bless whoever I need to bless and everything else. I actually have been fortunate enough to not only be around them, but I have driven an anniversary Countach. So I do have actual.
I'm exceedingly jealous.
First world experience with that. Obviously, I get it because I'm going to come around to this because it makes sense. Okay, I and Chad are of that same age of where we get really jazzed about the Gran Turismo cars. Basically, I mean, you could just put that as a blanket statement there. Anything that's Need for Speed or Gran Turismo, we're excited about. Right now, all of the cars that appreciate or have, experienced this kind of bubble are all about what car that was for somebody who couldn't afford it at the time, but is now of the age to afford it. And that is still people that are our age, but just, I want to say like 10 years older, just a little older. And a few of them have a little bit more money. And they did, I mean, I think you and I, all of us still probably had or have seen, the Alpine poster, the Lamborghini and stuff like that. I mean, it was the first poster car. I get that. These people were from before video game cars, but they still had that as the most outrageous, most sought after, coolest car you could possibly ever, aspire to.
Yeah. Well, it's like a spaceship.
Those people have money. So what do? Now, and here's the other thing. There was a time, and I'm talking about 2009 or whatever, these things were $90,000 or less.
Which is crazy.
Now it's crazy, but at the time it was like, of course they're 90 grand or less. At the time, I even remember thinking that because one of my friends' uncles had one, and I believe one of the stupidest things that's come out of my mind. It was one of those things. It was like, "There's a Countach," and I was like, "Yeah, well, those are crap," or something like that. But I was a kid, because it was like it was at the time. It was always like, "Well, that's the least fast Lamborghini." Not
Right. Well,
because
it's the most ostentatious thing
yeah,
in both looks and also mechanicals. So like
right.
nobody wanted it at one point.
Yeah, so I get it. I get this car's journey. Like seriously.
Yeah.
And the best part is now that I've gotten to drive one, I was always like, okay, well, it looks so cool. And then when you're around one, you're like, wow. I think we've all probably seen one in person at the least. Uh,
Yeah.
you know, and they
I
are
mean, at a car show or something.
yeah, or whatever. You kind of are around them, you're like, man, this thing's nuts. And then I always put myself back in the position of imagine the 80s. If this is nuts in 2023,
Yeah.
imagine in the 80s, this would have been like a spaceship.
Yeah. I always found it very interesting about this particular car because it was designed first off by Horatio Pagani, which is the Horatio Pagani.
Yeah,
and
you're absolutely right.
It's exactly who you think it is. It's literally that Horatio Pagani, the guy that is Pagani and owns his own car company now and makes the most beautiful cars literally ever. So like that's one part of it. The other part of it is because because of the way the LP400 was like looked and because it had the big flared wheel arches and all this craziness to it, and then they sort of took a lot of that joie de vivre, if you will, away from the car and made this 25th anniversary that was outlandish but not as crazy, that because of why everyone loved the Countach before that. It sort of became this like I said, it became this like bastard stepchild of the Countach family, and nobody wanted it because it was not as insane and 80s and cool as the old ones. Like it didn't have the phone dial wheels, and everyone was like, "Bah, I'm done with it."
Yeah,
no one cared. But now, because it's literally the lowest production Countach ever made, and it is now sort of having its day because of the low production numbers, because it is designed by Pagani, because it has these weird little quirks that the rest of them didn't. It's finally starting to like, and I say finally starting because these things are going for like 800-900 grand. But this is, I think, the start of that. We see that sort of, curve upwards where it stops being linear and it starts to be more hyperbolic, where you're like, okay, this thing is going to be a $2 million car in like 2 years.
Sure. So I think excellent points all around, especially because it's like the car's already kind of wild, and it's hard to tone down a Countach. That's not it's not really the correct term for it. But yes, but one thing that I will say, I think the reason why, and like I said, might be in my head, but a little bit of it is because we're still in that age of that crossover that I have of the pre-war old stuff and the new stuff. Is one of the other things that these anniversary cars have that a lot of the other cars don't, is that all of them were fuel injected. And I think that there's a level of car buyer out there that goes, well, fuel injected, I could have one of those. And because you don't have to mess with it as much. What you don't think about is it's early, Bosch fuel injection, and you do have to mess with it a little bit, but not as much as 6 or whatever it was, individual carbs, to do it. So it's like there's a little bit of not an intimidation factor, but I think you know what I'm saying. Like there's something about it that a normal person would be like, well, that one's later. They're fuel injected. They've got it figured out. I still get all the Countach looks, but without all the, me having to get out there and rejet everything, every time I want to switch states or whatever it may be that your holdup with, carburation is. So I think that that plays a larger part in it than the styling or anything else. Cause like I said, it's like, if you tell somebody like, hey, I'm going to buy a Chevy truck, this one's carbed, but this one's EFI, you're going to be like, probably go with the EFI one because I really don't want to mess with it. And that's
I want the least hassle.
That is a very dumbed down version of the the carved Countach versus anniversary Countach. But I mean, I think that might honestly be a factor with some younger, and I mean, again, air quotes younger, because they're definitely over 40 buyers But there's some of these guys who are just like, I just want to have one and enjoy one, and I know that it stands at least a 2/3 better chance of starting than
Right.
the older cars. Uh, but like I said, getting back to it, I've driven an anniversary car, and it was one thing that was astounding. I will say, first and foremost, you get in it, it's cool. You're first of all blown away that you're in a Countach at all. That's not a kit car. But second of all,
Sure.
there's the noise, there's the thing, the significance is not lost on you, especially as these things go up in value. But there's always this thing that I've had that I'm glad I still have, that as cars march on, that we kind of talked about in the beginning of the podcast, so like, oh, everything 2008, everything's fine. Um, Horsepower has gone out, astronomically
Oh
out the
yeah.
window for everything. And I think that's kind of the thing. So now 700 horsepower, 800. Now you go, okay, that's now the threshold of a fast car. So you go, all right, I'm
Agreed.
going to drive an older car that has, that has 300 or 400 horsepower. This is going to feel dog slow because
Sure.
that's your new mental benchmark. But that's, like it or not, that's kind of how I felt. I felt like I was like, it's going to feel quick or maybe whatever. It's not going to feel fast because it's an old car. I was pleasantly surprised with the power. I'm not going to say it obviously put my eyes, into the back of my head or anything like that.
Sure.
But I was like, wow, faster than I expected it to be.
It's interesting you say that because I mean I know it's still like a big car, but like it's also
They're not
lighter than a
actually.
lot
They're
of
pretty
modern cars
small.
too.
Actually, kind
Well,
of
no,
small.
I mean like big is like it seems lumbery, and
Yes.
there's some weight to it, sure, and
Sure.
like there's no power steering, like yada yada yada. But like
It's a chore. It's a lumber wagon, but it
yeah,
is not. Yeah,
but it's also not like a 5,000 pound EV that is like
right.
trying to get out of its own way in certain ways. Like EV is different, obviously. Like some of them, like they can be 6,000 pounds and still do a 2 second 0 to 60. That aside, like you put a
Right.
six
So
thousand
that's
pound car in the 80s, and it's like, oh well, that's gonna take 0 to 60 in a weekend. So like 300 to 400 horsepower in the 80s in a lighter car still feels freaking fast.
I agree. So I think, like I said, it was that more than anything, and I think that this is my experience with practically every Lamborghini I've driven. Um, the event is not almost necessarily the speed; it is the event itself. You feel
Right.
like that is why I feel like there's a lot of people that naysay them, and they are for showy people and whatever else you say. But more so than any fun weekend special weird car, I feel that sense of occasion in every Lamborghini that I've driven more so than every other special car that I've driven, whether the car drives well or not. Like I personally, now that I've driven two different Countaches on different occasions, I can personally say I do not want one. But I am happy to have driven one, and I see what the appeal was because like it is, you're like, wow, something's really happening here. And I think that is part of it. Now, is it $800,000 part of it? Tough call on that one.
Right.
Like I said, the first experience I had one was backing it up to start it up in a fast food parking lot. And I had to do the whole door open, sit on the thing, and the clutch is heavy as hell. And then people are not letting me go. And, it's like, it was just like already, I'm like, oh my God, I'm just stressed. So like the first thing,
Typical Countach
the
experience.
first thing I had is just being stressed as hell driving this car. But then once I got it out on the road, I'm like, okay, this is pretty great. Now, what's interesting, and this is what I want to say about it, because we're talking about the anniversary cars. That was my first and only experience in it until like later in that year. I actually got the opportunity to drive an earlier Countach, and I didn't know there was like that big of a difference other than the engine. The seats are different, not obviously the body styling, stuff like that. The seats are different, and they were like, the gentleman who let me drive it was like, well, no, it's so much easier to get in and out of. And it was an earlier car, it was a 78. So he was like, get in. I like sat down, drooped in. I was like, oh, wow. I mean, the anniversary Countach, I'm not a giant man. I'm like 5'11". And I felt overweight and tall in it. Like I felt like I was like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine what whatever else normal American I guess feels like in this thing. But I got in the 78 and I'm like, this is pretty great. And this driving experience in the 78 I thought was better, and it was carbed and it made a bunch of cool sounds and all this other stuff. And I was like, wow, given also the nerves weren't there from the first time of driving a Countach.
Sure.
But
That's
I
another
see,
knock
like I said,
against the 25th is it's sort of like a softer car.
the orchestra of the car, I 100% understand why there is a lot more excitement brimming around them. Yeah, to bring it back to the list. I totally get it. As far as a car, I think they are better to look at than to drive. As somebody who has driven two of them, I can say that with utmost confidence.
Interesting.
That's just the way they are. They are way cooler to look at, and I love looking at them. And like, I would love to have one in my garage, but the thing is like, if I had 5 other cars in my garage, it would not be the first one I would choose. I mean, and that's just my honest opinion.
But I mean,
I love them.
I think
and I'm very thankful for my experiences with them. I'm just saying they are cooler to look at than they are to drive, and that's just the way they are.
I think that speaks volumes for just the Countach as it is. Like when it came out, it was basically the spaceship. Everyone in Miami and everyone that had money had one. But as the years wore on, it's like, well, it's not the best driving car. Like, and we understand that. It's now more of a showpiece. If you have a Countach, the likelihood of you just being a driver outside of like maybe you being Matt Farah because he owns it and he drives his and like really like is an enthusiast about it. Like there are very few of those people. Most people that are buying these cars they're gonna stash them. They're gonna use them as a showpiece because they are spaceships.
Now especially.
Yeah,
now especially.
Absolutely. Yeah, because they're just gonna keep going up because they're in that same now Ferrari echelon of like, okay, well, it's an older Lambo. Oh, it's an older Ferrari. They're just gonna keep going up.
But the other thing is we are dwindling on people who know how to work on them, and your average owner is not the person who will be working on it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's not happening, but in general, that's the case. Yeah. Now, Steve did mention, he said, what do you think of the new Countach? I mean, I think I'm not having an original statement here. I love it. I was actually fortunate enough to be there at the Quail, the unveiling year. I love the way it looks, but I mean, I'm going to call it what it is. It is an Aventador with a really, really cool body kit. It is the coolest looking Aventador, and I love the Aventador. The Aventador is a really cool driving car. I think they did the headlights so cool. They did the best version of a retro headlight I've seen on any of these, let's bring the badge back cars. I love it. I think that what you don't see if you don't see one in real life is they have this really cool center skylight thing. That's not really a thing from Countach's, but it's still cool that they have it. I mean, is it worth the premium you pay over a normal Aventador? No, but they will always be worth more. And there's always going to be everyone who bought one probably has a paint matched real Countach from the 70s or 80s in their garage, and they'll sell them as a pair, and they will always be very, very cool. So, I mean, to answer your question, I love it. I don't think it's its own car, but I don't think that they did the name a disservice.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's good. Because that's been a knock on the new one is just like, oh, it's not a real Countach. I was like,
well, it's not.
Yeah, but it's a low production Lambo. Like it's going to be worth millions of dollars. It's already worth $2 million at this point.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think of a Lamborghini Cyan or a Centenario or any of those? Like the Veneno, Reventon, they're all of those like crazy.
Yeah, they weren't. Yeah, Reventon. They were never their own vehicle. They were always the most extreme version of that current platform. They can't,
exactly.
Lamborghini can't make a separate platform for it's just
they're not a big they're not a big production company. They're still bespoke in that respect. So two cars that I want to get your opinion on, very, very, very different. One that I mentioned before, the 1946 to 1950 Chrysler Town and Country, and the 2008 through 2013 BMW M3, the E90s, because I owned one of those and they're very cool. But I want to get your opinion because it's old versus modern on this list. So those are sort of the next two. After that, we'll just run through the list and I'm just going to give you like rapid fires, like yes or no. Definitely. But those two specifically, I want to know your opinion on because they're very cool in their own right because it's just old school Americana and modern European, potentially collector's item M3 because it's the only M3 with a V8. So start with the Town and Country, then go with the
not the only M3 with a V8. How many times do I have to tell you this?
Only production M3, mass produced.
Okay, yeah, Dad.
I think we can actually spend more time with the M3 than the Lincoln. So the thing that I think about the Lincoln, I'm actually surprised to find it on this list because although they are very desirable and they were the luxury car of their day. I mean, it's hard to describe what they were because, like I said, car categories weren't as defined back when those came out. But that was like, I guess, the poster child of your family car. You often, even in this list, they always said, the town and country means you got the wood. You got the, everything was. This was as nice of a Ford platform you could get. So for those of you who don't know, and I guarantee everyone who's listening or watching does know, your hierarchy of Fords go. Ford is at the bottom. Mercury is kind of mid-tier. That was like your Pontiac. And then Lincoln is like your Cadillac. And so the Lincoln, therefore, was always the nicest version of all of these cars. In the town and country was the nicest trim of those.
Not to correct you or have you go down the rabbit hole. No. This says Chrysler.
Oh, the Chrysler. Sorry.
I'm not trying to like be the, let me just raise my glasses on and get on my
honestly,
keyboard.
Though, even for the listeners, you're correct. I couldn't see it on the screen.
No. Like I said, it was
same kind of deal. Dodge, Plymouth Chrysler.
Yeah, they were all like that back in the day.
So it's same order. Point is, once you got to the the town and country class. I guess. Oh yeah, you're right. For the Ford version, it was the Country Squire. This is the town and country. Either way,
semantics.
Point is, you got your nicest trim of the family car. This is what fascinates me about this being on this list is sure, I guess it's it's up and coming because, people are finally realizing how cool it was that you had these kind of recently post-war cars with wood that still were kind of meshed with, the steel. But I think you're going to still fall into the same category of no one knows how to drive 3 on a tree. Even people who regularly drive stick shift kind of find that weird. Like, even if we all drive stick here. And I guarantee you put somebody who just is not used to it or is unfamiliar at all, they're going to be like, all right, what the heck? To this configuration. But not to mention, it's like I said, you got to kind of look to the future here. It's not, this is a kind of car, unless you grew up knowing how to make this car keep running. These are cars that were willed into existence. They were not, they're not like a Civic where it's like, oh, it's still here no matter what anybody does. It's like these cars have been willed back into where we are now. Like, people consciously made an effort to make these cars still work. So I have my apprehensions about them being worth a whole lot in the future because these cars are not specialized enough that you send it to Giuseppe, down at your LA, whatever the hell, that fixes your Countach.
Right.
But they're too special to take to Midas and have somebody work on it.
Right.
So you need, as the owner, to figure out how to work on this thing. And I'm concerned, maybe it's my pessimistic attitude towards millennials and Gen Z, but it's one of those things where it's like, I'm concerned that, like, yeah, they're pretty neat, but, unless you yourself are going to continue to will this car into existence, it's going to be a tough sell on the future. Because Guess what? If it's already tough enough for us, think about the next generation who's already being like, I don't want anything less than a Tesla that can drive itself, let alone this.
Right.
Well, wouldn't that
thing?
Wouldn't that then fall into oversimplified business 101 of supply and demand? Because nobody really works on them, because the numbers are kind of dwindling, because they have that, woody factor to it, and not the trouser kind, but they're disappearing, and you're going to have, Bill in a suburb of Boston, who's one of 6 people globally who knows what these things are, and that's sort of past it. I don't know. I will say this.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm surprised to see this car on the list, because I think that, unfortunately, the more people grow up, like you said, you got to look at what your dad passes down to you, or whoever your car mentor may be. your uncle, you know, you're a shop guy down the street, doesn't matter. You got to look at what they pass down to you, or, you know, interest wise, or what you're willing to tinker with. And yeah, so it is but the thing is, it's a dwindling supply of, or dwindling source of supply and demand. Like, there are none left, and there's a way fewer amount of people who want them. So I think this is like one of the last few years where old cars are worth anything, because it was like somebody else taught somebody else that this was going to be worth something.
Right.
Because after that, they're going to be like, all right, well, so what is this? And then I need to like make effort to make this thing move.
Right.
Like, that's annoying.
Right. I mean,
we can't even make kids drive stick shift now on reliable cars.
Let alone a 46 town and country.
That's what I'm saying. Like, you know, on a car that you know will work.
I think there is, but I mean, I don't know. Let me put it to you this way. Greg sent this list, and I saw the Countach, and regardless of what my personal feelings on the Countach are, like, they are the car, personally. They are the poster child for the cocaine epidemic in the 80s, to me.
And they always will be. I think Countachs will always be worth something, because guess what? There's nothing else that looks like it, no matter what. As much as as valuable as these town and countries are, that still looks like, to the layman, an old car with some wood on it.
Right, it almost looks.
Yeah.
Here, you kind of mentioned
as much as I love them, I'm just saying that's what that.
It just
but
looks
the
like
Countach
an old commuter car.
Makes sense on this list. This, almost to the untrained eye, looks like, why would someone replace the metal doors with wood? Who did it?
Yes,
what like,
totally.
What, you know?
That's still the question people have today.
What B-24 mechanic decided to go home and modify his car or something like that? Shout out to Mike.
Well, and I've said it even at
when did Morgan enter the chat? Like,
right. Whenever we do get you know, a Woody at Worldwide and stuff, and I've had the opportunity to drive a few across the stage. And honestly, if any of you watch the commentary, I have, you know, a very lovely co-host, Kayla. She does not know anything about cars, and she's open to it, but she's a great presenter, and she loves learning, I guess, you know. But the point is, she's great at keeping it together as a presenter and keeping the show moving. And obviously, I can't help it. It's their long days and stuff like that. And I always make jokes about how much she loves a good Woody. And, you know, it comes on the thing. And eventually, once we started getting into this thing where we could start to drive the cars, every time, like, you know, you'd come up on a Woody in the catalog, I'd be like, Kayla, we got to get in there. Because it would be very funny to be like, Kayla, we're in, you know, now we have a Woody. You know, there's always this thing. So my experience with Woodies has always been like taking her, and I've taken her back as far as even in the last auction, one of the earlier ones. So it was before it was, like, I guess, necessary for style, but more so like before panel vans were a thing. So we were in a 1928 or 29 Model A Woody, but it was for like businesses. And they called it the Splinter Box as a nickname, because it was just, like I said, they didn't know, they just took the wood and just made a little box on the back so you could hold more stuff. And it was fascinating. And then over time, that became the classier kind of thing to do. And there's one of my favorite cars. The name is escaping me. There's a beautiful Pontiac station wagon. Like I said, just from the only thing that's metal on it from the outside are like the front hood and fenders, and the rest of it is just pure wood as a station wagon, and it's just beautiful. And you're just amazed that over time this thing hasn't warped to the point where you can't close the doors, you know. I mean, because it's how did they do that?
What I got out of that was so basically you said a box turned to wood.
Well, yes,
but the point I was trying to make, I was trying to make before was that the Countach kind of makes sense. Like, I understand the craftsmanship involved, and some of them are very pretty, but a Countach makes sense. Like, this makes sense from a standpoint of, it's like, stick it in a museum and it denotes a period of time in the automobile industry.
But that's about it. I don't think people are clamoring for this, is my, I guess, opinion.
No.
Yeah. I will say one thing though, and if you're listening to this as opposed to watching it, please go to this article and just look at this image that we have up on screen now. It's the one where it is a moving image of it on track, and they shot all of this at Lime Rock, which I've been to. It's a wonderful racetrack. It's picturesque. It's awesome. This image is probably my favorite image in this entire article because of how the metal of the fenders and the little trim pieces blend into the guardrail. It's just a wonderful shot. It is absolutely gorgeous from photography standpoint, but also just from an old school car standpoint. Like, they're not the most beautiful cars in the world, but this shot in particular makes this car beautiful. Like, it's worth going to the article just to look at this image. It's really, really nice. I just wanted to say that.
We're into weird shit when it comes to cars. I'm sorry.
I'll defend you. You actually made a great point there, and then I like that. Like I said, the juxtaposition of the guardrail is absolutely perfect.
It's very cool. It's just a nicely done thing, and so my profession is like I'm a medical copywriter, and I work with graphic designers. And over the last 16 years of working with graphic designers, I've learned a lot about how things are set up as far as like imagery is concerned, as far as graphics are concerned, as far as photography is concerned. So like certain things draw me in. Like, it's not necessarily the car, it's just the way that this picture is just gorgeous. So it's worth going to the article just to look at that picture in particular if you're into photography. It's just a really great picture.
And then forget about how I confused it with being a Lincoln at all.
Definitely
ignore that entirely.
Yeah. At any rate, not to what's the best way to phrase this without sounding like an asshole. I've had enough of talking about this car. Let's move on.
Yes.
So let's move on.
Let's move on to something that needs new bearings.
I'm ready.
So we'll actually just go right to the rapid fire section, and really quick, just like a 2-minute commentary, because I am interested because I own this car, was on the E90 or E9X platform M3. Do you believe that should be on this list? Do you think that that's going to start going up in value starting next year?
I agree.
It's like your 2008 through 2013 M3.
I agree it should be on the list. I don't know if it'll be going up in value starting next year, but I do agree it should be on this list. It's always been a special car to me as well, for a number of reasons. I didn't even know Chad had this stickler point about it being not the only V8 M3, but I mean it is. Production.
Yeah, no, the E40, the E46 GTR.
They made homologation specials of the GTR to take it racing.
Yeah,
anyway,
it's the production.
Not to be overly pedantic, but like, yes, as far as the one mass-produced sort of, this is the M3 and this is the engine you get. Yes, I will concede that.
Yeah,
point.
Chad considers homologation specials.
Aside, I
yes,
love it
because those are the cool cars.
It was one of the first dry sump, high revving V8 mass-produced things. I mean, they're awesome. I love driving them. I mean, I wish I was so excited. I was like, is this where the M3 is going? Like, I was like, I mean, I get jazzed to this day when I hear one. It's one of the best sounding cars.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know everybody's, manually elitist jerks and all that stuff like that. But like, if you hear a rev match downshift in one of these with the SMG with an exhaust, rap, you're like, oh, it just seriously gives you just goosebumps. I mean, these things are they just rule.
And the amount of power you can get out of these
with an SMG anymore.
Exhaust.
Well, no. So no, they call the SMG. It is a dual clutch.
Well, yeah. The SMG was like the E46 version, but yeah.
I'm saying that in the non-stick shift version of
yeah.
You hear a rev match downshift, you're like, oh, it's just goosebump inducing.
This engine with the right exhaust and specifically the DCT on the downshifts, the manual sounds great, but the way the DCT sort of downshifts on this thing is utterly insane.
That's right. Yours was an automatic, Greg.
It was an automatic. Yes, it was a DCT.
Oh, he's one of these. Okay.
No. The whole point of that car was to go up against the Mustang. Just keep that in mind. Like, his car was a 620 crank horsepower.
I don't think that
M3.
anybody at BMW ever was like, our main competition is the Mustang.
No. But that's what the whole series from the content.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant
for
the
us.
engineers.
No. That was the whole thing. And Greg was going to have that, and that was right around the same time I got my Mustang, and then eventually it was going to be, it's got. He had a centrifugal supercharger on his M3, and eventually it was going to be, Ford versus BMW or what have you. Circumstances dictated that it was Mustang versus Polestar, so, but that's
yes, because of reliability. which these are not known for.
Rod
Though
bearings.
I will say the S65 engines with rod bearings done is an actually reliable engine. It's
Yes.
the rest of the car that's like, maybe
It's just
maybe it
unfortunate
won't
that
be.
like such a major service needs to be done
Yeah.
as a 100% failure. that's
Yeah. And
That's-
you'll see people on the
That's
forums and on the
BMW.
Facebook groups like, oh, I've warmed up my car properly every single time. I've waited 2
doesn't
minutes
matter.
and yada yada yada. I don't have engine wear. I'm just like, yeah, of course you
Yes,
don't
you do.
think you have engine wear. You're not inside your engine looking at it. I guarantee you, your rod bearings are gonna fail in the next 10,000
Gregson,
miles, dude.
One of my favorite things that I've seen, I went to one of the first times I went to Cars and Coffee in Scottsdale. There was a girl who brought one, and we were like, okay, it's weird. And she had like the monster stripes over her headlights. And all. It was like,
Of course.
whatever. But my favorite thing, for some reason, I think she saw me. I don't know if I wasn't doing it. I was just kind of doing like B-roll walking by it. And she kind of waved me and my friend over. And she was like, blah, blah, blah. Like, you want to know more about the car? And we were kind of like, not really. Like we know.
We already know
enough.
everything we want to know about it.
But then she was like, she said something, and my friend said something. He's like, rod bearings, and she goes, I have them in the trunk if you want to see them. And I was like,
okay, well
what?
that's interesting because
So,
not
yeah.
many people
So then
keep
she
them.
goes, she brought them to Cars and Coffee. She opens up the trunk and she had them in a box and she had them all leather out. She goes, look, and here's where the wear was. And I was
Yeah.
like, now this is
Yeah.
awesome. I
That
was
makes
like, I
for
was
a
not
great
gonna go-
paperweight. Just put them in
These
acrylic.
are my rod bearings.
I was like, okay, this just took it to a next level. I went to, this girl doesn't know that her, she's on borrowed time here with her monster stripes and eyelashes and whatever else she had on the car. And then she's like, do you want to see my rod bearings? And we were like, boy, do we.
All right, so
It
if I'm
sounds
ever gonna,
so
if we're ever gonna
dirty,
get,
but also sounds so accurate.
if we're ever gonna get Elliot into a windowless van, not candy, rod bearings. Hey, you got candy? No, I'm good. I got rod bearings.
Rod bearings.
Oh, let me see the rod bearings.
Let me see your
Give
rod
me-
bearings.
Look, these are, and Greg knows how hard it is for me to say this, but they're cool. I remember when these came out, wanting one.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the M3 that I had, the E46, I
like the M46 M3.
don't. The E46 M3
Oh, no.
is one of the greatest cars ever made. I will say the driving
Chad's
feel,
version
the
was
driving
not.
feel on one of those. I have been searching for a way to replicate that ever since I owned that. When mine worked, it was a phenomenal experience. I didn't necessarily like the fact that they had built-in rasp, but regardless, that was like the tiniest little thing.
The sound isn't the best, but it doesn't matter. I tune that out.
Mine was a basket case. The interior, and it's funny, but the interior was. Don't get me wrong. I bought it cheap with a lot of miles, knowing I bought a cheap car with a lot of miles. But the interior, like, that's fine. I was going to replace the interior anyway. I was going to try to do a light restoration, and where if mechanical parts failed, upgrade, right? And then it was the dreaded BMW 4-letter word, Vanos. And then
Yikes.
rear main
5-letter
seal.
Even worse.
Yeah, it's one worse than every.
Subframe. Let's talk about all the E46 issues here.
Then it was the rear. We thought that was
Rotting
after
subframes.
because Freddie actually vouched for the car, Tavares, for our listeners and viewers. And I'm by no means throwing him under any sort of bus or anything. I knew what I was getting into. Well, I knew it was an old high mileage car that was going to need work. I just wasn't prepared. So it was rear main seal and clutch and flywheel. Then it was, okay, it's still leaking oil. Let's look at that. Then it was the Vanos. And then a couple of this where I was working with a shop that I will not ever use again. And then I'm driving. I'm like, okay, fine. I have a line on a brand new Imola red interior. I have everything set up. This is going to work. I finally made it. This car's working fine. Left front brake caliper seized. I'm out. I'm done.
Oh my god.
Goodbye.
Yeah, it was one thing after the other. We're just like, yeah, we're done. We're done here.
And I remember it now. It irked me at the time. Now it's actually I shouldn't say kind of. It is a really funny story. But I remember at the time, Freddie, B is for Build, all these guys, they'd get a new car and then they'd walk through everything wrong about it, and then they'd sort of be entertaining about some of its badness, right? So I remember I did my best with that. And I wasn't even over the top with a lot of stuff. You know, sitting here like this, that, and I just, again in the video multiple times, I got this car cheap, but here's everything wrong with it. And then,
Sure.
and then Hoovy comments on it, and I'm like, oh no. And it was, he just
God.
ripped me apart, like ripped me a brand new one. And I'm like, I don't know what I did. I just followed what everybody else was doing. And I'm like, oh. You have to remember, this was back when we were like, maybe what, like 10,000, 25,000 subs,
subscribers, maybe.
We were
This was in like 2017. This is a long time
and
ago.
then this big dog comes in there and just
In internet terms, it was 100 years ago.
Yeah.
yeah.
Greg had hair,
Yeah, I had hair at that point. It was,
you know.
Oh yeah.
yeah. It's been a while. Now I have
Been a
shiny
rough-
chrome dome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but
Let's,
Hoovy was like, "Wow, you misrepresented the car," and Chad was like, I don't think I did. There's video evidence against this."
Yeah.
It was very funny, but yeah, I mean, look, the M3s are doing the same as the Porsche 911s. They age, they don't go below a certain point, and then they start going up. So I feel like the E9X platform overall is going to start going up next year.
I agree.
I think it should be on this list.
Now that one I will
just
agree
having
with because,
owned
like,
one.
But yeah, a little biased there. But you also, actually, I love your comparison to 911s there because guess what you missed there is they've aged. They get a new one, and with every new one, the true fans think it's the next worst thing that's ever happened. So they double down on the old one. And so
100%.
each new one, everyone goes, well, no, now this is the last best one that's ever happened.
Yep.
And so
They said it with the air cooled. They said it with the 996. They said it with the 997. It's the same thing. It's
So
exactly. And to a lesser extent, they do the same thing with the WRX. Oh, the new WRX is trash. And then they're all like, oh man, that 07 Hawkeye is looking really good right now.
The new
Like,
WRX is trash.
Yeah, I agree with that. The
Talking
new
about
WRX
people
is
who
absolute
have-
hot garbage.
talking to the fan group who've had a fundamentally unchanged EJ since 2003
Yeah.
ish.
And then let's put it in a crossover that's been lowered.
Yeah, and they're like, oh.
Yes. So I'm gonna rip through the rest
Yeah,
of this
I said
list.
rapid-
And
rapid fire.
I want to give you yes or no. Should be on the list that is going to increase or no. So 1997 through 1999 Mitsubishi Pajero Evolution.
I think yes. Now that people are understanding that they exist,
Yeah.
and now that we can import
Agree.
them. But that's the only reason.
Yes, they're very
good.
cool.
They've always been good, but
Yeah.
Now we can have them.
Yes, right, exactly. I saw one locally, and I'm like, I must have this thing. It's
We
so
have
cool
one
looking.
locally, and the guy was like, "You can come drive it." And I'm like, "Oh, I can do that."
You're just like, I'll be there tomorrow.
Yeah.
2011 through 2016 Ferrari FF. So the original clown shoe Ferrari shooting brake with a glorious V12.
Listen, it's tough to say they'll appreciate this year. That's the thing. If you give me the caveat of this year,
Well,
that's what makes me
starting
go,
to appreciate this year, I think, is the whole thing.
I just don't know. I've driven one and I liked it. I always wanted it to be a station wagon F12.
Yeah, agreed.
It's
It's
less hardcore. It's way less hardcore than the F12.
Yeah.
But I've always wanted one. Like, it's one of my, like, if I was just a, rich Uncle Pennybags daily driver, I would want one because it's like, it's perfect. Like, I can put my stuff in it. And it's still a Ferrari and it's all-wheel drive and it's so good.
Right. So yes
Maybe,
or no?
But the GTC4 Lusso is the better version of it. I say no on this because it just there's a lot of them and they're funky looking and people still don't like wagons.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think
Even as much as
I
I like
don't
them
think there's
personally.
the nostalgia there.
Even as much as I like them personally, I
Yeah,
don't know if the market's there.
I agree. I'm with you on that one. I don't think this one should be on the list. I think maybe in 5 or 10 years, sure, but I don't think now.
It's I think a
there's
lot
too
of
many of them.
out,
Just because it's
maybe.
a Ferrari, it shouldn't be on the list, and there's no nostalgia to it. It's just an all-wheel drive Ferrari. That there's a better one that exists. I don't see this appreciating in the next year starting.
There we go.
2000 through 2005 Jaguar XKR. So the Ian Callum era kind of
I know.
car.
I would love it because my mom had two XK8s during this era. So I'm very partial to this design, and I have a lot of experience in these cars. That being said, it is the most money my dad has ever lost on a car ever, to the point where he's mad at me about it,
Because
and I
Jaguar.
didn't even do anything about it, and I was just a kid. He's even said something about it.
He's mad at me, and I wasn't even
Yeah,
I wasn't even
it was
there
one
for
of the
it.
car. It was one of the car that I got in high school. I think it was like for graduation. He traded my mom's Jag 05 XK8. It was awesome, and I guarantee you it had 20,000 miles or less. And I think they gave him. He paid 110 or something for it.
Ooh.
In 05. And I think they gave him
Mama.
I think they gave him in like 07 or 08 25.
I was gonna say 30.
Yeah. And he
maybe.
was like
Jeez.
like it made him like sick, and he was like,
What a bat.
yeah, and I was like, and he was like, and then to this day, like I pointed out literally today, I went to lunch, I drove my dad to lunch, and I pointed out, I was like, hey, there's an XKR, and he goes, what a bad decision. And I was like, well, hey, I was like, well, hang on. I was like, they got a little better. And he's like, nope.
Yeah.
Nope,
Yes.
they didn't. I was like, yes, it did. We had a Ford era. We had a Ford era car. All right.
I was gonna say the 2013, 2014 versions right before they stopped for the F-Type were amazing.
Fine. And I was like, and now the F-Type is just great. And he's just like, he's like, I don't care. I don't want him. He just feels personally burned by the by the Jag brand. So here's the only thing about him. I love him personally. Just to wrap this back up because we're rapid firing. I have a lot of personal experience with one. I would love to have another one because they are cheap. But do I think they're going up in value? I kind of have to say no, because there's really nothing that spectacular about them. They look
There's
good,
a lot of them still.
and I think that you can still look rich if you have one, even if it's an 05. But that's just if you're not a car person.
Right. You can also get the same car 3 years newer with a better engine and better interior for the same price. I don't
with modern connectivity, because I tell you what, they
correct.
Yes. By 04 is the first time you could even get nav, and all they did was replace the analog clock on the wooden dash, and it had the tiniest little nav screen that had the least populated data, and I believe it was like even confirmed at the time. Volvo had the most detailed nav maps, and this is by 04 standards, so who cares? But it was like, and then
right, which is nothing.
Jaguar, I remember even like my mom would like drop me off at school, and it would look like we were just on an uncharted field in the middle of the thing. I was like, this doesn't even make sense. We're like in the middle of town. And it's like, what is this nav map doing?
Yeah. It's
anyway,
weird.
so I say no on that one. As much as I like them, no.
Yeah, I agree there. 1965 to 1970 Chevy Impala SS.
I actually can see these coming back because because they're pretty cool. They have been unnoticed for forever because of the Camaros, Novas, GTOs, everything else that GM was making back at the time. But these were kind of these cool big cars that were still making big power. And I've seen a couple of them at car shows, given they had the correct placards. But, I mean, they drew pretty big attention. And you kind of were like, hey, I didn't know that these were ever cool. Like, there's maybe they're coming back out of, hibernation. I don't remember ever seeing a lot of them as a kid, but I do agree, maybe. I don't think they're going to be, the Mona Lisa or anything here, but I could see them being cooler than they ever have been in the last few years.
Cool. Yeah, and I agree. I think these specifically because the Camaros and the muscle cars, the traditional muscle cars are a little bit played out. I feel like the Impala SS is one of those that sort of it's ready to have its day. So I agree with you there.
I think hold on.
81 through
with muscle cars, I think a lot of it comes down to what's the best way to describe it? Basically, this has an SS badge on it. So eventually, all those other cars you mentioned that have SS variants, they're going to pull the floor up a little bit on vehicles just because it's wait, that was cool, so this has to be. Someone gets it, then it becomes, how this stuff goes. But, the big body cars.
Right, like the Silverado SS from 2003.
I mean, you make the joke, but I mean, at some point, the hot.
No, those are actually way cooler than 3 Silverados. So, I mean,
But,
still works.
True.
It's. I mean, I was more specifically talking. That just threw me. Well done.
Sorry. I was trying to be funny, and then I was like, actually, it's a good. I just proved your point.
It's a funny yet pertinent point.
You're in content. Make it both interesting, correct, and entertaining. But no, obviously there's cars with a badge that are crap, right? Like, we all know the Mustang 2 exists. No amount of everything else is pulling up that, right? I'm sure at some point it will, because fucking millennials and Gen Zers. But,
guess what's going to be on next year's list?
Oh, I'm sure that there's
probably that.
There's some person with who wears glasses who doesn't need them. It's like, wow, that's the Mustang everybody hates. I want one, and suddenly their value is going to go up.
I unfortunately really do want a Mustang 2 Cobra so badly.
All right, goodbye, everyone.
All right,
and we're ending stream now.
I have control.
They're so horrendous that, like I said, it transcends the badness. And I'm like, okay.
There are certain cars that are like that are just like, okay, well, it's cool because it's so bad.
Oh, I don't think that's a good car. It's one of those, you're like, wow.
Yeah, no, cool and good car are not mutually exclusive in this conversation.
How did you make a flamboyant bad car?
Because they started with a Pinto.
That's what that car is.
Well, yeah, they did start with a Pinto, correct. So, but either way, I think we're all in agreement that this SS potentially it should be on this list.
I think yes, I agree. It should be on the list.
All right. So then next one, 81 through 86 Jeep CJ Scrambler, which were already expensive.
I mean, as much as I'm not like a big nuts off-road guy, I say definitely. I mean, like, the Scouts have proven that that's a thing. Yep. I mean, you can't even stumble into a Barrett Jackson or any auction without a Coyote swapped first-gen Bronco,
right?
Anything like that. So these
God
are all
intended.
begging either in perfectly stock shape, which would be crazy because all of these have been ridden hard and put away wet,
right?
But even in stock shape, I believe so. Just because, think about it. As much as I disagree with it, even friggin' JK Wranglers are worth so much money. Like, it doesn't matter what I think. Like, yes, obviously, so a cool version of one of those, whether I agree with it or not, I think it should be on the list. They're obviously going to go up.
Greg, look at your phone just real quick. Not to disrupt.
But yeah, I agree here. I have my phone. I see nothing on it.
Lean back from the microphone. Your jacket's rubbing on it.
My jacket's not rubbing on it at all, actually.
I'm hearing something in your background. Anywho,
no, I think it's reverb. I
like this next one.
Yeah. So this is there's two more. 64 through 66 Ford Thunderbird.
Now, I like these. My favorite feature of these, I've always thought they were cool. Even had a Hot Wheels version of one. They went away. So, like, if you look at, God, this would be really hard to make short, but if you look at the inception of the Thunderbird, it was a Corvette competitor. And in fact, the only reason the Corvette exists at all is because of the Thunderbird. So the Corvette was not doing well. The Thunderbird came out, and GM just kind of did one of those, oh, we can't let that win kind of things, and willed the Corvette into existence. But the Corvette then eventually way smoked the Thunderbird, in fact, of performance and sales and everything else. So Ford kind of had to switch gears, and that's what this second-gen Thunderbird did. And what I love that they did with it is they actually did a good job of that. They didn't just go, oh, well, I guess we'll make it this other thing. They made it this, and so they were like, hey, we can have 4 seats, and we'll still be kind of sporty but kind of boaty. But if you want, you can put this really cool tonneau cover over the 2 rear seats, and it gives the driver and passenger seats this cool hump, like a speed hump, over the non-existent headrest because it was the 60s. but it looks so dang cool when the tonneau cover is over those things. So you can literally, before that was a thing, you can go, hey, we can have a family car, a sports car, and a convertible. And they did it. And like, I think that like there was this forever that everyone goes, hey, here's what I have in mind for a Thunderbird. And it was the 56 or like the 96, like Thunderbird. There was like all this, nothing in between, but there was this second gen Thunderbird. And I do believe that these deserve their time in this, in the spotlight. And I love them. I hope that they do appreciate, because I think they're really cool.
Yeah, they are really cool. I agree with this one too, just because you get a speedster kind of like vibe with it, like a 911 speedster. It's a cool car. It's just
speed
a
humps,
really
but then
cool
also
car.
you can pop that back off and still put 2 kids back there.
Correct. Exactly. Like it's
like you can't do that with a Corvette.
It's not just like a purpose built thing. It's a useful thing. So that's very cool. I agree.
Say the Corvette's useful because you don't need kids.
That's right. Exactly.
Also true.
Wait, hold on. The Prowler's on this list?
Yeah, that's why I love this list, is because
love it.
Because this is such a weird car. It's weird in
it's 90% there.
Every single definition of the word weird this car is. It has exposed it has exposed suspension components like a freaking open wheel race car. It has a pedal box that should not exist. And it has the worst engine ever to shove in this. Put a V8 in it, and it's the coolest car literally ever. But it has like what is it? A Pentastar V6 in this thing? Is that 3.6?
Yeah, not even. It wasn't even the Pentastar. It was whatever the crap was before that.
Right, and it's got the worst automatic transmission of all time. Like, other than this thing looking the way it does, it is a absolutely garbage car. But to the point we made before, cool, dumb things appreciate value.
I love it. So I did have a poster of one of these in my room as a kid. And
I had a model car of one of these. They were just cool.
They're cool. There's so much I can expand on the Prowler though of why I love it, and I have the only minor personal experience I have of it. But like, I had a poster of one. It's cool. And you know what their model after was like? The 32 Ford Highboy was when you took a 32 Ford, removed the fenders from it, and you made a hot rod. It is, and still to this day remains, the perfect interpretation of a modern hot rod. Like, that is, if you go, hey, what would a futuristic hot rod look like? Well, somehow they nailed it in 1997.
They nailed the design. And that was back from the era where Chrysler was pilfering pretty much everything from Ford. It's like, all right, the Cobra was awesome. All right, the Viper. All right, this is, like you said, modeled after an old Ford or what have you. And I believe there was plans for them to do a mid-engine GT40-ish style thing. And then Ford came in and got the engineer. So I forget the exact history on it, but there was actually conversations at Chrysler about doing a mid-engine, quote-unquote, Viper that was going to be GT40-ish or whatever. These always looked amazing, and I know that someone just recently put a Hellcat in one of these, and I can't think of a better place for that swap.
Freaking perfect. But like I said, at the time, you look at it, it's brilliant. Looks-wise, which honestly, if you think about a lot of collector cars and stuff like that, that's almost 70% of what matters.
Pretty much, yeah.
But you look at them, they're so dang cool. And it's so awesome. And like, even
especially with the
time
trailer
when they were new. Oh yeah, no, the trailer's so cool.
I mean, there has the only other car that has ever existed that is even close to this thing, and the whole reason they did this obviously was the 30s era Fords with the open exposed like linkage up front with the suspension, like the rat rods. Like there is
other
not
people
another car that has ever existed mass production like this other than old early 1900s cars, and there were still not many of those at all.
Those
anyway.
were people hot rodding them,
right?
Nobody at the time. Like, this is a manufacturer. You can just buy one of these. That's nuts.
Yeah. Like this,
and so
that's the equivalent of like Honda making a hatchback, slamming it to the ground, putting a coffee can exhaust on it, and underglow, like
right from factory.
Yeah, you can just go get one of these.
Yeah.
No, so like you get this, and I just remember as a kid, because my dad had Jeep Grand Cherokees when I was way younger, when these were kind of, new. And we went and they had a black one on the showroom or, on the lot. It doesn't matter. And all you knew, and I was too young, it was like, I just knew I loved them. Like you looked at them. I was like, oh, cool, we get up close to it. And I remember my dad popped the hood, because there wasn't like magazine articles about these things yet. And it was like, oh, this is like a V6. And then like, then you have the 3-speed with overdrive or 4-speed with overdrive, automatic. And he was like, can you get these in manual? And they were like, no, this is like the only way you can get them. And I was like, okay, and how much is it? And they were like, $46,000, and like, 1997. And my head was like, okay, kind of being like, all right,
that's the correct response. Like, okay.
Yeah. Like he was like, cause he's a Corvette guy too. Yeah. He's like, I'm still trying to figure out what this is. Who is this for?
So you
like,
want
it's
Corvette
the same
money
shifter I have in my
this
Jeep.
thing.
Yeah, it's like the same shifter I have in my Jeep. It's actually a smaller motor than in my Jeep because he had one of the 5.9 Grand Cherokees. Back in the day, it was like, so this is like, it was like, and then eventually he just kind of was like, this car, it looks really cool, and I think that's about it.
Yeah.
But looking back into it, this was Chrysler's experience of bonding aluminum to other aluminum.
Yeah.
So as a consumer, you go, this thing's all show, no go, which, I mean, it is.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it is. But if you look more into it, there was a lot of things they were experimenting with and did. And I love that they made it happen and that it looks identical to the concept car. And I will forever be a sucker to this. If you can make the production car look exactly like the concept car, I am sold.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even care what happened. The Chrysler Crossfire, not exactly a good car, looks exactly like the concept car. The Chevy SSR, again, not exactly a good car, looks exactly like the concept car. And then all three of these, the Prowler, the Crossfire, and the SSR, were all cars that people were like, what is this?
Right.
Who is this for?
100%.
What do we do with this? And then for some reason, they made for multiple years. They didn't just go, hey, we did it.
But this one in particular is one that you look at it and you're like, that's a concept car that they made. The others, yes, they do look exactly like the concept car, but this
that one is way more outrageous.
Yeah, this looks like if no one's into cars and they looked at this, they're like, that is something that they designed in a room and then made. There was nothing in between. And like people like get that. And that's why I love this car, is just because it's just ridiculous. It's wild. I love it that they made it at all.
At the end of the day, two things. One thing, my girlfriend who's in the other room, not into cars, she saw one, she would say, I saw a cool car today.
Yeah, right.
And then the other thing is, I know exactly what they are. I've been in them and been around them. And every time I see one, I still go, oh my God, there's a Prowler.
Right. Exactly.
So that is the mark of a cool car. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter beyond that.
Right.
That means it's cool.
Right.
So I say absolutely belongs on the list.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
People are especially realizing now how crazy of a time it was and how much it didn't make sense for Chrysler to make it and how awesome it is that they did.
Yeah.
And no matter what, you put one of those, I mean, especially in a small town, like you could just drive up and win a car show.
Right. If a 1945 Town and Country is going to be on this list, a Prowler, you bet your sweet ass it better be on the
Prowler belongs on this list a million times more than Town and Country does.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Not for nothing, but the fact that they managed to take that 30s, 40s hot rodding and put it
on Lime Rock?
I mean...
yeah.
I was just looking at that.
If they could take that design language and make it work with late 90s safety regulations, right? Like what is one of the things that plagues a lot of these retro modern designs now is the fact that they designed it in the 60s when it didn't matter where the center line was and where I'm not a fan of the car, but like the biggest offender this to me is the Alpine 110 or A110 or whatever.
A110.
You know, you look at the car it's based on, and then you look at the modern monstrosity that it is. Both cars are ugly in my opinion, but that's like some cars you can't bring from the past into the present, but they pulled it off with this. You know, having to have fenders and having to have bumpers and having to have headlights a certain height and everything like that.
Yeah, that brings in a whole other thing. Like it's amazing. The reason we got the coolest cars we got to do is because people got to design things and they got to just exist the way that they were designed. In fact, the Prowler was right at the tail end of that because there were still standards and they still made it look cool. You know, if you've ever been in an old car, one of the best things you can do is when you're driving one or riding in one, there's this threshold of where you could put your arm that just like rests. It naturally rests at the window, and you can have your arm out the window. Or, you know, like whatever. And there's certain cars that are like really good at it. And then as you march on in time, and I know that the listeners of this podcast aren't going to see this, but as you march on in time, your elbow gets higher and higher and higher and higher.
That belt
and
line
next thing
keeps
you know,
going up.
there is no version of you putting your arm out the window comfortably, you know, in a Hellcat without you looking purposely uncomfortable.
Yeah, you're up here.
Like everything's fine. I'm totally fine. Everything's okay.
Yeah, I'm deliberately doing this. Like it's.
I'm not really short. It's just the car.
Yeah, that's when you know.
Yeah,
you're like, all right. Well,
I just love that the daytime running lamps, the ambers, are on what looks like a control arm. It's just hysterical.
I know.
It is the most
a lot of people
ridiculous.
Those two plastic parts from that.
It
is like one of the popular mods.
It is, in my opinion, the wildest bit of modern design on a car ever made, because. What on earth are those? It is so
pre-LED.
crazy.
Imagine what they could do with LEDs.
Right.
Like think about it. They had to design that with like a cavern to sink in a halogen lamp and a reflector.
Yes. Like, but imagine that car without those things. Like it almost looks like a coffin nose cord. It's very strange.
Oh.
It is super weird to be able to say that something designed in but put into production in 1997 looks like a coffin nose cord from the 40s or 30s. Like, dude, that's wild.
That's why it's so cool. It's the best of a 30s Ford highboy.
Yep.
Coffin nose cord. That's why, again, full balls believe it should be on this list.
Yeah. I do see them go. They made a lot of them. They did. It's not like a low production number. They didn't make a ton of them, but they made a bunch. I see this thing, especially in the next 5 to 10 years. I see this thing tripling to quadrupling in value. I can see these being low mileage over $100,000 easily in the next 5-10 years.
And good on them. I mean, like they're fine. They're not spectacular to drive, but I will say this surprisingly, and I didn't believe it until Tyler bought his. He was like, this is the most comfortable car seat that has ever existed. I was like, that's crap. It just looks like a normal thing. I sat in it. It felt like I was sitting in like a Tempur-Pedic lazy boy.
The seats are not.
I don't know how you don't fall asleep driving one. That's how comfortable the seat is. I
do agree. I sat in one at the New York Auto Show a long time ago when I was a kid, and I'm like, man, these are comfy. But the everything
that's not
past
what you want in a sports car.
Everything past that, no. The pedal box is like this big. It's the tiniest thing ever.
If the most endearing part about your car is like, it's the comfiest seat you'll ever sit in. You're like, all right, well, what about when I turn corners? You're like, well, don't. You're on a couch. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
You also have a minivan motor.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, it's a minivan motor and
transmission.
Even worse transmission.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, you have a transmission will shift gears eventually, and maybe if you beg it to.
Yeah, everyone like says, "Oh, single clutch is so bad." It's like you should really drive a Prowler.
No. I'll take a single clutch all day over one of those.
And that then finishes the list. So we have a couple on there that are yes, a couple that are no, and I agree with almost everything you said.
I'm glad. I feel like we all concurred.
I agree. Chad, do you agree with everything that was said on the list?
I mean, I'll put it this way. When it comes to quote unquote collectors and treating cars as commodities, that's not where my head goes hardly ever.
That's not where any of our head goes.
You know, so it's like trying to predict what cars will boom. It's like for whatever reason, I have a halfway decent track record of almost buying cars that a few years later just went poof, and for various different reasons and stuff. But I would say I would agree with most of it. But frankly, like, if you look at a lot of those cars, did I want one when I was a kid? Yes. Okay. I'm sure there was a bunch of other kids like me who wanted one. Then naturally they're going to start to drive prices up and things like that. However, that's just like half of these cars I was just looking at, the Town and Country notwithstanding and the Countach notwithstanding, but like, I wonder what engine I could put in that, or I wonder what I could do this or that. Like, completely just not even remotely understanding that, like, hey, that Prowler, it holds value because it has a crap engine. Like, the second you put a non-numbers matching engine into it, it loses that collectability, so to speak. Even though, pick a modern pushrod V8, it would be better off with it. I know Doug will hate me for say, put an LS in it, put a, what is it, second gen Hemi in it, put a Godzilla in it, whatever.
No, it would be a better car, but then it's not.
But it would be a worse thing if that.
It
would become a worse widget. You know, because at this point you're not talking about
whatever crap V8 they had at the time. It would have gone down as a more legendary car.
Oh, 100%.
Definitely.
But unfortunately, it went down as more of an art exercise than good car.
And that's the thing. That's like, so I remember. I mean, I remember watching. You know, Barrett Jackson was almost for quad. I remember this time of year, or more January into February, was one of those times for me and my dad, or I'd be glued on the couch with my dad, and we'd watch Barrett Jackson, Rolex 24, and that sort of stuff. Like, all of that happened around the same time. So I remember that stuff fondly and watching it. And then, like, as I started getting older, I'm like, why the hell is this Pontiac F88 getting more money than the Corvette it's based on? It is ugly as sin. And that's when, like, and that's when my brain just was like, screw it. I like a car and I want to modify the car. Because that's what's my dad, you talked about Corvettes. My dad had a 59 Corvette that he took the 283 out of, put a 327 in. It was bored, balanced, and stroked to almost 380-ish cubic inches, somewhere in that neighborhood. Suspension, all these other mods, and it still had the massive steering wheel because no power steering.
Still an old Corvette.
You know, but it was like, so that was always it. It was, he would talk about that. He would talk about his Mustang. So this is one of my now traditional long-winded ways of answering a question. I will happily concede on whether or not XYZ will go up in value to you guys, because it's something you actively pay attention, whether it be an interest in or that. But to me, looking at a car as you would, you know, like orange futures, I don't know. To me, it's like, it's not a thing. It's a car. It's meant to be driven. How do I make it better? And like, that's always been, so it's for
I
that
agree.
interest level.
I think
so.
Look, on our level, I think we all are going to do that. Like, we would never buy a car. Well, at least I wouldn't yet, as an investment. And even if I did buy something as an investment, I wouldn't say, well, now I can never drive it. Because guess what? The building where I keep it could collapse tomorrow. Or, you know, I live in Kansas, you know, a tornado could rip through here, you know, in a week. It doesn't matter. Even if it is an investment, the best part about having a car as an investment is that you can use it, you can enjoy it. All these people who invest in stocks, bonds, you know, whatever else that you have, responsible though it may be, you don't get to drive around in those, you know, or look at them or really touch them or do anything. So I mean, there's liabilities to both. But it's very nice, I think, if you, like I said, I think Tyler has been in a great position because, like, he's gotten to have these cars, enjoy them, and then had the luck of practically buying half of this list that's gone up in value. And been like, okay, well, I've gotten to enjoy them, and now they're going up in value. You know, it's like, whatever.
Right.
And then, you know,
yeah, and I mean, you see,
and like I said, my dad never taught me to buy cars because they were valuable. He bought cars that he liked, were passionate about, and then he restored them and we built them together. Like
Right.
it was never one of those. I didn't learn cars as untouchable art piece. I learned cars as passion piece.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was cars was, here's the thing. In this guise, it gets you where you need to go. In this guise, it's a thing to tinker with, take apart, learn how it works, put it back together, improve it if you can, whether it be parts or what have you, and then that sort of thing. But it's like, I am with you. If I was ever to get a car, it's like, man, these things are almost guaranteed to go up in value. I'd absolutely, the day I buy a car, as I'm just going to place it here, and in 5 years, we're going to see where it's at. Almost like my 401k.
No.
Like, no.
That'll never go well.
But again, I do see, it's a fun conversation to have, but just in listening to the way you sort of describe what inherently makes a car valuable versus not, and all this other sort of stuff is very highly interesting to listen to. But like just in that back, like the whole time we're talking about the Prowler, I'm like, I think it'd piss people off, but make it better if I put a Godzilla in this bastard. Like,
But the good news is they're not rare enough that like anybody would be that pissed. Like
I'm sure most people would be like, "Oh, thank God it doesn't have." Like, I think those would be. I don't know. Like,
trust me, that's the general consensus about that car. It was like it has the wrong drivetrain.
I mean,
it has everything going for it except the drivetrain.
And in my head, I was like, "Wait, what? What if we took, the 5.9 or whatever V8 or whatever V8 they had at the time, and sort of did a
You said the 5.9.
just did a period version. So we had a period engine and a period car with find a manual transmission that'll work with it. I wonder if that, like, you start doing that, it's like, hey, this is what it should have been. First, I know it will never be because original will always trump mod any day of the week unless, like, it's a specific owner that has a story and everything like that, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, man, you start doing a service where you can put a V8 into a Prowler and...
I say we S2000 turbo swap it.
There you go. That would work too.
I mean,
Actually be more easy in that slim engine bay.
yeah, I was gonna say 600 horsepower turbo S2000 swapping that thing would be chef's kiss. That would be an unreal combo, I would imagine.
Because I'm me, you'd be better off just doing a K swap with a turbo on there as opposed to the F22.
Well, yeah.
Now, I never got to talk about it towards the end of this podcast, but like I said, I did own a Hellcat at some point.
That's
in my
right.
life.
You did.
So I can tell you it was a very good platform in the big 4,500 pound Challenger that it was in. So I can imagine, swapping that same kind of power into a handsome, svelte body like the Prowler. I mean, I get it. I get the appeal.
Yeah.
As someone who currently
It would be
owns something
bananas.
that makes more power than a stock Hellcat, I totally get the appeal.
I know. Okay, I get it.
No, this isn't a measuring contest. This is
Not a pissing contest. My Hellcat was dead stock.
yeah, but that's again.
My Polestar makes 400 horsepower at the end.
I guess if we do some math, I was like,
that's
wait a minute.
tied for as much as the horsepower is that I have in my
You
estate.
put a downpipe and a tune on it and made less horsepower on the dyno.
Yes, but then I put cheater juice in it and it was fine, so don't worry about it. E85 for the win.
But all-wheel drive, and I mean, guess what? I mean, I guess you guys are dealing with like snow and stuff like that. I mean, you probably can't even bring this thing out, yeah?
I mean, you'd think.
No, he does. He drives whenever.
Well, let me put it to you this way:
Do you have a daily?
At this point in my life,
The Mustang.
the Mustang is my daily. I have the Chevy Equinox that was my father's. That's currently my mother's, but she doesn't drive. So like,
So you have alternative transportation.
I have if I absolutely need to be somewhere and there's a threat of snow, I have a vehicle I can take that'll get me there and not, have teriyaki boys in the background the whole time. But
Which is the only song you should play when driving ever, by the way.
let me put it to you this way: with the current tires, if it's even raining right now, I won't take it out. I got to get the winter rubber on my stock wheels, but with that, a little bit of snow in my area. As long as I don't go too far in either direction, where I'm now going down the mountain, I'll drive it.
God, you guys have mountains.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're in the Appalachians, so mountain is like a very large.
I mean, compared to the Rockies, no. Compared to Kansas, yes.
Yeah, you have to realize we're in the dead plains here. I mean, it's.
But yeah, I mean,
yes, we have the Tug near us.
I believe, I'd have to,
like when I went to school in Missouri, I thought that like the hills and stuff there were like, I was like, oh my gosh. And I did have a Mustang at the time, and there was snow.
So,
but it was an 02.
Slightly different here.
Slightly different.
You will go to the top of a mountain and get snow, and then go down in the valley and not.
Where I live.
No. It was just basically like everything was a little icy, but there was elevation change versus here, where it's like everything's icy, but it's the same.
Gravity isn't working against you.
No matter where I go.
Yeah.
But what was it? I think here we're at least I know we're in the like top 3 or 4. I believe where I live, Schooley's Mountain is the second highest point in New Jersey. Again, it's not like saying it's Kilimanjaro versus Everest kind of a thing.
Second highest point in Jersey is such a hilarious statement. I'm sorry,
but it's one of those things where we get pretty drastic temperature change where we're at versus say Atlantic City, to use a point of reference that's.
Yeah, it's funny to think of like you think of Jersey, you think of like Staten Island and Jersey Shore in the show, and then you're like, it's just the Jersey Shore is like, but then like a lot of people like tend to forget like northern New Jersey is like literally in the mountains.
It's a big
like,
state. It's a big state,
and it's funny because it seems so small, but there's like so much diversity of terrain in this state. It's like it's ridiculous.
Just like, it's also you guys just get dogged on like so easily,
so hard.
So it's like.
Oh, you're from Jersey. Hey, Jersey Shore. Hey, Jaeger bombs.
All but one of those dickheads were from New York.
Correct.
Of course.
The Jersey Shore was literally just people from Staten Island. The end.
As Midwestern as I am, both of my parents are East Coasters, so I got kind of raised. Like I'm only in Kansas by like happenstance.
Right.
Like so, neither of my parents are from the Midwest, and they're always being like, "Oh God, why do they do this stuff around here?" My dad's from Virginia, and my mom's from Philly. So nice. So they're always being like, "Yeah, they do stuff differently around." They kind of just like raised me East Coast, but here.
So just a general lack of patience and like.
Yeah, and then and then I always had to like go to the East Coast to visit my grandparents and stuff. So like I've been a bunch.
Yeah.
But it's just funny like all these people like around here that have like Midwest grandparents. I was always like, what are you guys talking about? Why are your grandparents not like frustrated about stuff?
Yeah. Why are everybody so happy?
Every East Coaster ever.
Yeah.
No, it's no. I just feel bad for you guys that you can't get decent bagels or pizza.
Me.
Like that's.
Well, hey.
But I think that's imperfect way to.
Is this a world record for a podcast?
This is our longest.
I mean, for
our longest
for
live
us,
show
for sure.
I'm sorry, and I'm sorry, Chad. You have to edit this. So
that's all right.
Good news. Don't be sorry. It's awesome for conversation.
As long as the conversation's moving along, I mean,
have me on again. I'll set the same thing up. I don't care.
I'm down. Let me put it to you this way. It wasn't like there was like 15 minutes of us just like staring at the other computer screen like, no, we talked about that. We talked about that.
You guys, no, I've got Chad. I got opinions here. So
yeah, no, this is like a solid 3 to 3.5 hours of straight talking. No, but that's good. That's really what like a podcast should be.
Just like chilling his ass off in the garage.
No, dude, like I said, I
know you got a space heater.
I got a space heater. I'm fine. It's like 30 degrees outside. It's like 55 in here. I'm fine. This is great.
Oh my god. I'm
also weird and
tree.
No, you guys are good. I'm weird. I like I'll go out and shovel snow in like flip flops. I love the cold. I'm a big fan. So this doesn't bother me. It's worse in the summer when I have to open the garage doors and I'm like it's like 90 degrees out with like 100% humidity. I'm like, This kind of sucks. I wish it was the winter now.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you, Mark Anthony. I was happy to join you guys.
Yeah, thank you for
Just
coming
looking
on.
at the chat
We're
towards the end
definitely
here.
doing it again in 2024 with Elliot. And if you are still watching and or listening, please go follow Elliot on all of his socials, including YouTube and Instagram and Facebook. It's Elliot Alvis on YouTube, Alvis.Elliot on Instagram, and Elliot Alvis Cars on Facebook. So platforms, if you just search Elliot Alvis, it'll be the first thing that comes up. So please go follow him. Sir, you have been awesome to have on. Again, record long for the podcast. So thank you so
Sorry,
much.
but also I
No,
had so much fun talking to you guys.
don't apologize. No,
You were
this
the
was
longest
awesome.
of our
And
3
we've had-
guests.
yes, the longest of the 3 guests, but definitely not the last guest for sure, and
No.
definitely not the last time you're coming on because this was awesome.
No, you.
Okay, well, if you guys are ever
but
just
to-
bored, just have me on. I'll fill in.
I will definitely take you up on that offer because the last 3 weeks
Okay.
have actually been
Absolutely.
hella fun.
Thank you guys so much as well. You guys are awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, and for everyone that joined from Elliot's socials, thank you for joining and for watching. Hope you stick around for
Oh,
more.
there's
We do this
some.
every single Wednesday at 8:30 Eastern time, and you can find us on Spotify, on Amazon, and we'll soon be on Apple Podcasts as well. So if you want to just listen to us there, cool, that'd be great. And if you don't, also cool too. We'll let you know when Elliot's coming back on, and we'll chat again in a very raucous and fun way.
Thanks, everyone.